Chapter 4073. Yun Yaro understood one thing a long time ago. The reason why Ji Tianxing was more popular and loved than other experts was because he treated people with sincerity. Other experts treated their followers as loyal subordinates and as sharp blades in their hands. However, Ji Tianxing was different. He treated the people who followed him as his friends. If there were benefits, he would never treat his friends unfairly. If there was danger, he would always face it himself and do his best to protect everyone. Who would not respect and support such an expert? It was because of this that everyone knew that his revenge plan was to fight against the 5 god emperors, but they still followed him wholeheartedly and helped him. Even Yank and Bai Feng, who were defeated by him and forcibly taken in as god kings, would follow him loyally after interacting with him for a long time. It was basically impossible for this to happen to other powerhouses. Therefore, Yun Yaro could understand and support Ji Tianxing taking the risk to seek a way to save everyone's lives. As for Ji Tianxing, when he heard his wife's slightly reproachful words, he knew that Yun Yaro was worried about him. Therefore, he held her hand and comforted her with a smile. Yaro, don't worry. Since I'm doing this, I'm definitely prepared and confident. Although the process is a little dangerous, I think it's worth it to give everyone another way to save their lives. Since you and Wu Shuang are here, I'll pass on the method and experience to you. You can also split a strand of your divine soul and merge it into the blood flame sacred tree. Yun Yaro shook her head lightly and said gently, to me, Wu Shuang, Wu Han and Cuckoo, our strongest backing and life-saving trump card is actually you. As long as you live, we won't die. And if you're not here one day, we won't be alive either. Although Ji Tianxing was very touched, he still wanted to refute this statement. Yaro, this is unfair to the children. Cuckoo, we can live and die together. But the children are still young and have their own lives. Even if we're not here one day, they should live well. Otherwise, who will inherit our wishes and avenge us? Yun Yaro was a little shaken. She nodded and said, all right, my idea is indeed a little selfish. I didn't think it through enough. Then, let's give it a try. Thus, Ji Tianxing personally imparted his experience to Yun Yaro and Ji Wushuang, teaching them how to cast spells. Both mother and daughter were very intelligent. Ji Tianxing only needed to explain it once before they learned it. Next, Yun Yaro cast a spell and tried to fuse them. Half a month later, she separated a wisp of her divine soul and successfully merged it into the blood flame sacred tree. Ji Wushuang cast the spell again and only used half a month to succeed. Ji Tianxing originally wanted Ji Ku and Ji Wuhan to split a wisp of their divine souls and fuse it with the blood flame sacred tree. However, the two of them were still cultivating in seclusion and shouldn't be disturbed, so this matter could only be postponed. Ji Tianxing still had things to deal with, so he left this matter to Yun Yaro and Ji Wushuang. After Ji Ku and Ji Wuhan finished cultivating, the two of them would impart the method and experience to help them complete it. Ji Tianxing left the distorted spacetime and returned to the secret chamber. He had stayed in the distorted spacetime for nearly a year, and 7 days had passed in the outside world. Nangong Buhua had sent messages to the various clans and factions. Now that 7 days had passed, the various factions had thought it through and replied. At this moment, Nangong Buhua personally came to the door of the secret chamber and knocked on the door to call Ji Tianxing to report the situation. Ji Tianxing opened the door of the secret chamber and saw Nangong Buhua standing outside, waiting patiently. Although Nangong Buhua looked calm, Ji Tianxing discovered that there was a hint of anger hidden in his eyes. It was conceivable that the various factions' replies were probably not satisfactory. Young Master Long, seeing Ji Tianxing come out, Nangong Buhua cupped his hands and bowed. He couldn't help but want to say the result. Ji Tianxing raised his hand to stop him and walked out first. Don't be anxious. Let's talk slowly in the study. Nangong Buhua nodded and followed him to the study. After a while, the two of them entered the study, closed the door, and activated the defensive array formation. There was a large number of guards outside the study, and only the two of them were in the study, so they weren't afraid of being eavesdropped on. Ji Tianxing sat on the main seat, and Nangong Buhua sat opposite him. He said with an angry tone, "Young master, I sent messages to 17 ancient clans and 36 top factions. Only 4 ancient clans clearly said that they would come to see you as soon as possible to discuss the alliance. The other 13 clans and more than 20 forces were all vague and ambiguous. Their words were full of perfunctory intent. What's more infuriating is that more than a dozen factions were sarcastic toward us. There were even some who firmly supported the Shura God Emperor and wanted to take my message Jade slip to inform the Meng Shuai and the Imperial Tutor. When he spoke of those factions, Nangong Buhua couldn't hide his anger and almost had a murderous intent. He spoke in a gentle manner, but it was conceivable that the replies of those factions would be very infuriating. It was far beyond his description. And all of this was within Ji Tianxing's expectations, so he wasn't angry. Well, tell me about the situation of those factions. Nangong Buhua snorted and said in a contemptuous tone, the leaders of those factions are all snobbish and spineless. Many years ago, they had been scheming to curry favor with the Meng Shuai and the Imperial Tutor and wanted to join the Shura God Emperor. However, the Meng Shuai and the Imperial Tutor didn't like them and ignored them. Now, they are using my message to ask for credit from the Meng Shuai and the Imperial Tutor. Perhaps they will get what they want. I see. Ji Tianxing nodded and said with a smile, everyone has their own ambitions. If they want to join the strong and gain benefits, then let them be. However, you must remember all of them. Because we're going to meet them soon. At that time, none of them can be left out. Although his voice and tone were calm, Nangong Buhua could still hear the murderous intent. Previously, he was worried that even if Ji Tianxing defeated those factions, he would consider the big picture and take them as his subordinates. If that was the case, he and the Nangong clan would have to work with those fence-sitters. Just thinking about it made him feel disgusted. Now, with Ji Tianxing's words, he was relieved. At least, when the two sides fought, he wouldn't forget to deal with those factions. Just as Nangong Buhua was making up his mind, Ji Tianxing asked again, who are the 4 ancient clans that are rushing here as soon as possible? At the mention of these 4 ancient clans, Nangong Buhua's mood improved. He replied with a smile, naturally, they are the clans that have received your favor and supported you the most. There is the War God clan from the Fighting Grotto Heaven, the Lan clan from the Azure Grotto Heaven, the Phoenix clan from the Divine Phoenix Grotto Heaven, and the Jiang clan from the Divine Attraction Grotto Heaven. Hearing the names of these 4 clans, Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and said with a playful smile, as expected, a friend in need is a friend indeed. Chapter 4074. Only those who firmly support you in the face of life and death are worthy of your trust. This unchanging principle had been proven once again. The Battle God clan of the Fighting Grotto and the Lan clan of the Azure Grotto would immediately express their support. This was within Ji Tianxing's expectations. However, the Phoenix clan of the Divine Phoenix Grotto and the Jiang clan of the Divine Phoenix Grotto surprised Ji Tianxing. Back then, he had helped the Phoenix clan by correcting their inherited secret manual. This debt of gratitude was neither big nor small. If the destruction that Kenshin had caused in the Divine Phoenix Grotto was included, his merits could offset his faults. Ji Tianxing originally thought that the Divine Phoenix Grotto would make all sorts of excuses and observe for a period of time before joining him. He did not expect the Phoenix clan to be the first to support him and be willing to form an alliance with him. As for the Jiang clan of the Divine Phoenix Grotto, many years ago, before Ji Tianxing left the God world, he had an unpleasant encounter with them. At that time, Jiang Tianyi and Jiang Tianxing brought him back to the Jiang clan, which frightened them greatly. One of the brothers was severely injured, while the other was severely punished by the clan leader. The clan leader Jiang Chuyun was also afraid of the Azure God Emperor's power. He was afraid that Jin Shuang would lead an army to destroy the Divine Phoenix Grotto, so he did not save Ji Tianxing. Later, when Ji Tianxing left the boundless heaven continent, Jiang Chuyun, Jiang Chusheng, and Jiang Chuxiao secretly helped him. Ji Tianxing originally thought that someone as cautious and timid as Jiang Chuyun would definitely not be the first to express their support. He did not expect Jiang Chuyun to be so courageous and be the first to express his support. He thought that the words he said to Jiang Chuyun when he left the boundless heaven continent must have been effective. Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and said, in that case, I will wait for them here. At this time, Nangong Buhua added, "Oh right." Another force also replied, saying that they will come to see you as soon as possible. Who else? Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and became interested. 100 Smelting Ancient Sect. Nangong Buhua answered. Ji Tianxing was startled for a moment, then immediately revealed a playful smile. Shu Bai Lian, this old fellow, is really obsessed with the 100 Refining Divine Hammer. Hehe, Nangong Buhua was puzzled. Young master, is the 100 Refining Divine Hammer in your hands? Wasn't that divine artifact destroyed long ago? Ji Tianxing smiled and explained, of course the 100 Refining Divine Hammer is destroyed, but I know the refining diagram of the 100 Refining Divine Hammer. I see. Nangong Buhua was suddenly enlightened. He chuckled and said, no wonder Shu Bai Lian is so anxious. Then this time, he must have come to negotiate with you and ask for the forging diagram of the divine hammer. Ji Tianxing just smiled and didn't say anything. Perhaps Nangong Buhua was still considering that the blueprint of the 100 Refining Divine Hammer was too precious to be given to Shu Bailian so easily. Ji Tianxing had to seek more benefits. But in reality, Ji Tianxing didn't care too much about it. It was just a supreme-grade divine artifact, and he already had a few of them. Now that he had recovered to the peak of the Divine King stage, he still couldn't control the power of the heavenly way. This made him confused and worried. The treasure he wanted the most was no longer a supreme-grade king divine artifact, but something of a higher grade. For example, an emperor-grade divine artifact. Of course, this was just the name he thought of, and it was a general statement. The divine artifact that surpassed the supreme-grade king divine artifact was definitely related to the power of the heavenly way, but he still didn't know what it was called. Then, the two of them discussed some follow-up matters. Ji Tianxing reminded, other than the dozen fence-sitters, send a message to the other clans and forces. Tell them that I said this, and this is the last time I inform them. It's still a 1-month deadline, and I won't wait after that. Those who come first are allies, and also friends. After this deadline, if you want to form an alliance again, you should consider your own strength. These words were somewhat threatening, and it was also Ji Tianxing's ultimatum. Nangong Buhua thought for a while and asked uncertainly, young master, are you sure you want to say this? We haven't taken action yet, and our forces can't be compared to the Shura God Emperor. Even if we threaten them like this, I'm afraid it won't work, and it might even backfire. He was afraid that those clans and forces that were still hesitating and watching would directly submit to the Shura God Emperor after being threatened by Ji Tianxing, or watch coldly from the sidelines. However, Ji Tianxing was not worried at all. He chuckled and said, if we have an overwhelming advantage, those clans and forces will know what to do even if they are fools. But now, it seems that we are at a disadvantage, and we can't be compared to the Shura God Emperor's forces. It's under such circumstances that those forces that are willing to form an alliance with us are sincere. Nangong Buhua immediately understood his intention and nodded in agreement. Young master, I understand. You would rather have a few loyal and trustworthy allies than a bunch of half-hearted partners with ulterior motives. Because you are already confident that you can control the entire situation, right? Ji Tianxing did not answer and only nodded with a smile. Nangong Buhua was not foolish enough to ask him where his confidence came from. After all, when Ji Tianxing killed Jin Shuang's army, the answer was already in front of everyone's eyes. Those clans and forces that were still hesitating and watching might not believe the rumors and felt that the Nangong clan was deliberately exaggerating Ji Tianxing's strength. However, Nangong Buhua had seen it with his own eyes and naturally understood how powerful Ji Tianxing was. That was the source of his confidence. After the discussion, Ji Tianxing got up and left the study. Next, he returned to the secret room to cultivate. Nangong Buhua patiently waited for the clan leaders and Shu Bailian to arrive. When the leaders of the 5 forces arrived, Ji Tianxing would come out to meet them. The news of Ji Tianxing killing Jin Shuang's army had already spread throughout the boundless heaven continent. After more than 20 days, the news had already spread to other continents. When Ji Tianxing's 1-month deadline was almost up, the news of Kenshin's return and his desire for revenge had already spread throughout the 5 continents. It was no exaggeration to say that half of the people in the heavenly realm knew about this matter and were discussing it. Even though the Nangong clan had released the news that Ji Tianxing had killed more than 800 experts, including Jin Shuang, alone, this news was too shocking. However, this news was so shocking that most people didn't believe it. Those forces in the boundless heaven continent that were wavering and watching in the dark had the same thought. Many people thought that the experts under the Shura God Emperor would be furious and retaliate against the Nangong clan after suffering such losses and humiliation. However, the 1-month deadline was up and the Nangong clan had not been attacked. The Meng Shuai and the imperial tutor were also very low-key and did not reveal any plans to the outside world. It seemed that they had swallowed their anger. However, everyone knew that this was impossible. They must be planning how to take revenge and how to kill Kenshin. At the same time, the 5 forces that had expressed their support for Kenshin and the 3 forces that had finally made up their minds arrived at Yenshu's grotto heaven one after another. Chapter 4075. On this day, in Yenshu Cave, in the Great Light Palace of the Nangong clan. The 1-month deadline was over, and those who were supposed to be here had arrived. As for those who were not here, they had made up their minds to observe the movements of the Kenshin and the Nangong clan, and then react accordingly. The magnificent Great Light Palace was shrouded in a solemn atmosphere. The most elite guards of the Nangong clan were guarding the surroundings of the Great Light Palace. The doors of the palace were closed, and only the leaders of the various forces, the elders of the Nangong clan, Nangong Buhua, and the others were participating in the meeting in the Great Light Palace. Today, Nangong Buhua sat on the left side, while Nangong Nahuang and several elders stood behind him. On the right side of the Great Light Palace, there were 7 divine king experts sitting in a row of seats. They were all dressed luxuriously and had a dignified aura. Behind each of them stood several divine king experts. They were the elders and protectors of the various forces. Although the forces represented by these experts were the first to express their support for the Kenshin. But when Nangong Buhua saw them, he did not feel any admiration or closeness. This was because 3 of them had masked their faces a month ago. Obviously, these experts were not sitting here today to pledge their allegiance to Ji Tianxing, but to negotiate. Whether the 2 sides could form an alliance would depend on the outcome of the negotiation, and whether the experts were satisfied. The hall was completely silent. Ji Tianxing had not arrived yet. Everyone was holding their breaths and patiently waiting for him to show up. 15 minutes later, the doors of the Great Light Palace finally opened. The guards at the door shouted, "Kenshin has arrived." So, everyone stood up and turned their heads to look at the door. Everyone's gaze was focused on the handsome young man in the white robe. Looking at him striding into the main hall, many people looked at him with awe along the way. Greetings to Kenshin. Nangong Buhua took the lead and bowed respectfully. The others followed suit and bowed respectfully. There was no doubt that Nangong Buhua had specially arranged for this appearance. Originally, Ji Tianxing had ended his cultivation a day earlier, and could have gathered everyone for a meeting at any time. However, Nangong Buhua insisted on following this procedure to make an appearance. He said that he wanted to frighten the experts. Ji Tianxing didn't care, but he accepted Nangong Buhua's suggestion. So far, it seemed that the effect was pretty good. At the very least, the few powerhouses who hadn't seen Ji Tianxing before had complicated expressions when they saw Ji Tianxing. Through the subtle changes in their expressions, it could be seen that their state of mind had changed. Ji Tianxing walked through the spacious hall and stood at the head of the table. He turned around to face the crowd. His gaze swept across everyone's faces and he said, "Everyone is too polite. Please take a seat." After he finished speaking, he took a seat at the head of the table. Only then did everyone else take their seats. Ji Tianxing was not in a hurry to speak. His spokesperson, Nangong Buhua, spoke first. Nangong Buhua stood up and cupped his hands at the experts of the 8 forces. He said, "Everyone knows why we're gathered here today and what we're going to discuss. Since that's the case, we don't need to waste time saying useless words. Here, I'll start first for everyone's reference." After he finished speaking, he turned to face Ji Tianxing on the throne and said solemnly, "Lord Kenshin, 1,000 years ago, The people of the boundless heaven continent were simple and honest, and the people were free. Our 18 ancient clans were divided into regions to protect the peace of the boundless heaven continent. The situation was very peaceful. However, ever since the Shura god emperor ruled the boundless heaven continent, he used all kinds of methods to suppress the 100 territories and enslaved millions of people. This caused the people of the boundless heaven continent to live in poverty and darkness. We wanted to kill the thief, but we were powerless to resist. We could only endure the humiliation and wait for you to make a comeback. Now that you've finally returned, the Nangong clan is willing to sacrifice everything to follow Lord Kenshin. We want to suppress the tyrant and overthrow the dark rule of the Shura god emperor. We want to save the entire boundless heaven continent and let millions of people regain their freedom. Lord Kenshin, please allow the 8,000 men of the Nangong clan to join you and serve you loyally. Nangong Buhua's voice was sonorous. After he finished speaking, he even bowed to Ji Tianxing to express his request. Ji Tianxing seemed to be deeply moved. His eyes shone brightly as he nodded solemnly and said, "The Nangong clan leader is righteous and cares about the people of the world. You're really a role model for our generation. The Nangong clan has a compassionate heart and is willing to sacrifice themselves to save the people of the world. This is even more worthy of admiration and respect. How can I refuse such a righteous request that concerns the people of the world? I accept the Nangong clan's allegiance. From now on, we'll become allies and help each other with all our heart." After he finished speaking, Ji Tianxing took out a jade slip and waved his hand, causing it to fly in front of Nangong Buhua. "Nangong clan leader, this is the alliance agreement that I made in advance. You only need to read this alliance agreement out loud, and we'll be allies." Nangong Buhua stretched out his hands without hesitation and held the jade slip. With a loud and solemn voice, he read out the alliance agreement in the jade slip. The so-called alliance agreement was actually an oath that Ji Tianxing had prepared in advance. After Ji Tianxing modified it, it was more like an alliance agreement. But in essence, when Nangong Buhua read out the alliance agreement that was close to 1,000 words, he still made an oath to the heavenly Tao. The 37th generation Nangong clan leader, Nangong Buhua, hereby swears that we're willing to form an alliance with Kenshin Longtian. We'll live and die together and will never betray each other. When Nangong Buhua's loud voice echoed in the Great Hall of Light, the leaders of the 8 forces were stunned. No one had expected things to develop like this. The so-called negotiation and discussion of the alliance was actually so simple and crude. There was a lot of swearing to the heavens, asking the heavenly Tao to bear witness, and so on. Before they came, the leaders of the few forces were still thinking about how to fight for benefits and how to bargain with Ji Tianxing. Now, it seemed that there was no need for that. Without a doubt, this was a scene that Nangong Buhua and Ji Tianxing had discussed in advance and insisted on adding. Ji Tianxing had originally planned to negotiate with the 8 forces directly and allow them to make some requests and conditions. As long as it was not too overboard, he could consider and negotiate. However, Nangong Buhua wanted to take the lead to speak and set an example for the 8 forces to set the tone for this meeting. That was because he was worried that the 8 forces would ask for too much and ruin the negotiation. Therefore, there was this scene. After 100 breaths, when Nangong Buhua finished reading the alliance agreement, a wisp of Tao runes appeared above his head and his body was glowing with golden light. In the sky above the Great Hall of Light, there were continuous rumbles of thunder. Obviously, the oath to the heavenly Tao had been completed, which was why such a phenomenon had appeared. The leaders of the various forces looked at Nangong Buhua in a different light. A few experts fidgeted uneasily and looked embarrassed. Chapter 4076. Isn't this too cruel? Is Nangong Buhua crazy? Is that an alliance? His swearing to God. Oh my God. The Nangong clan won't talk about any conditions or benefits, and they'll be loyal to Kenshin unconditionally. Damn Nangong Buhua, isn't he too much? Isn't he being disloyal to us? I understand now. Nangong Buhua must have discussed this with Kenshin. He's purposely making things difficult for us. He's highly regarded by Kenshin. Of course, he can put on a show. Even if he doesn't talk about any conditions, Kenshin won't mistreat him. The leaders of the various forces looked at each other and secretly discussed with each other through voice transmission. They felt very indignant in their hearts. However, no one was stupid enough to expose Nangong Buhua, nor would they leave because of this. They all wanted to see how Nangong Buhua and Kenshin were going to act. As expected. When Nangong Buhua finished swearing, the heavenly oath was established. Ji Tianxing seemed to be moved. He stood up and looked at Nangong Buhua with sincerity. Family head Nangong, I absolutely believe in your sincerity and sincerity. Look, even God is moved by you. Such deep friendship, I will definitely remember it in my heart and never forget it. Then, he looked at the people in the hall and solemnly announced, I hereby announce that I'm officially forming an alliance with the Nangong clan. From now on, we'll help each other and live and die together. When the operation is successful, I'll give the Raging Flame region to Nangong Buhua, and the Nangong clan will govern it. In addition, I'll allow the Nangong clan to develop their forces and industries in the surrounding 10 regions. I believe that under the leadership of Nangong Buhua, the Nangong clan will grow stronger and more prosperous. This was Ji Tianxing's public promise to the Nangong clan as a reward. Of course, the Nangong clan would receive more than this. After hearing this, Nangong Buhua was a little excited. He quickly bowed and thanked Ji Tianxing. On behalf of the Nangong clan, Nangong Buhua thanks Kenshin for his kindness. When he finished, Nangong Nihuang and the other elders also bowed and thanked him. The leaders of the other forces were dumbfounded once again. They were all dumbfounded, and their expressions were particularly interesting. That's it. He's bought the Nangong clan over with such a small reward. Is he fooling us? If the operation succeeds, the entire boundless heaven continent will belong to the sword god, but he only rewarded the Nangong clan with the Raging Flame region. Nangong Buhua's over, the Nangong clan, the clan T the T clan T the Nangong clan T a reward. Goddess T the TST the TTT. I thought the Kenshin would have at least rewarded the Nangong clan with 20 territories since the Kenshin trusted the Nangong clan so much. Ji Tianxing's decision was very different from what the leaders had expected. They couldn't believe it and were very disappointed. At this moment, the leaders could already imagine how they would be treated. No matter how they negotiated, they wouldn't be able to reach their expectations. Even if the Kenshin treated them like the Nangong clan, they wouldn't be interested in such a small reward. The leaders couldn't sit still. They were hesitating whether they should find an excuse to leave Yenshu's paradise as soon as possible. The alliance of the Nangong clan was completed. Ji Tianxing's gaze fell on the leaders on the right side of the hall. Even though he didn't say anything, his intention was clear. If the leaders were smart, they would have stood up and expressed their intention to form an alliance with the Kenshin. That way, the alliance ceremony could proceed smoothly. However, the few patriarchs and sect masters pretended not to see Ji Tianxing's expression and remained silent. No one was willing to stand up first. No one was like Nangong Buhua, who was unconditionally loyal to Ji Tianxing. Everyone was silent and the atmosphere in the hall became more and more awkward. Nangong Buhua was a little anxious and couldn't help but remind them, leaders, you've come all the way here to participate in this grand event. We don't have much time. Let's not delay the important matters. Especially the 2 clan leaders who are of virtue and prestige. Even I have to call you seniors. At this time, shouldn't you show the spirit of a senior and set an example? This was what it meant to drive a duck to a perch. As Nangong Buhua finished speaking, everyone looked at Lan Wuji and the leader of the Divine Phoenix clan. After all, these 2 were recognized as seniors and had more than 28,000 years of cultivation. Under everyone's gaze, Lan Wuji and the leader of the Divine Phoenix clan felt awkward and couldn't keep quiet anymore. Even if they were unwilling, they couldn't show it too much. They didn't want to leave a bad impression on Kenshin and ruin everything. They were just depressed and resisted Nangong Buhua even more. As for the other patriarchs and sect masters, they secretly heaved a sigh of relief, waiting to see how the 2 of them would react. Ji Tianxing looked at the leader of the Divine Phoenix clan on the right. The leader of the Divine Phoenix clan couldn't avoid him. He could only stand up and bow to Ji Tianxing. He didn't talk about the alliance and asked, Young Master Long Tian, We haven't seen each other for many years. Is Bai Feng doing well? Everyone was stunned for a moment before they realized that the Divine Phoenix clan had a God King expert who had followed Kenshin for many years. In that case, the Divine Phoenix clan had already placed a bet on Kenshin. Ji Tianxing nodded and said, Bai Feng has been traveling with me all these years and has experienced more than 10 battles. She's safe and her strength has increased after training. Since I've met the leader of the Divine Phoenix clan today, I should let Bai Feng meet you to prevent the Divine Phoenix clan from worrying. After saying that, he used his divine consciousness to wake up Bai Feng, who was in the distorted space-time. Then, he waved his hand and shot out a white light to activate the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes Tower. Swoosh! With a flash of white light, Bai Feng appeared in the Radiant Hall. Ji Tianxing had explained the situation to him in advance, so he wasn't surprised to see so many God Kings sitting in the hall. Bai Feng, disciple of the Divine Phoenix clan, greets seniors and fellow Taoists. Bai Feng, who was dressed in white and looked cold and serious, bowed to the God Kings in the hall. Then, he walked to the leader of the Divine Phoenix clan and bowed respectfully. Greetings to the clan leader, the Great Guardian, and the 2 elders. After so many years, Bai Feng was happy and excited to finally meet the members of the Divine Phoenix clan. However, he looked calm and didn't lose his composure. He already had the dignified bearing of a leader. The leader of the Divine Phoenix clan, the Great Guardian, and the 2 elders observed carefully and found that Bai Feng had already broken through to the 8th level of the Divine King realm. This discovery caused everyone to be filled with pleasant surprise. Chapter 4077. Everyone knew that it was extremely difficult for a God King expert to raise 1 level, and it would usually take a few hundred or a few thousand years. Bai Feng had only reached the 7th level of the God King realm for 300+ years. The Phoenix clan's experts all thought that he would need at least 1,000 years before he could reach the 8th stage realm. They had not expected that he had already broken through after not seeing him for several decades. It was imaginable how much benefits he had gained from following Kenshin all these years. The Great Guardian and the 2 elders were curious and envious at the same time. But now was not the time to chat and reminisce about the past. They could only suppress their curiosity as they waited for the clan leader and Bai Feng to discuss official matters. Divine Phoenix clan leader looked at Bai Feng and sent a voice transmission. Bai Feng, tell us the truth, what is Kenshin's character? Is he trustworthy and worthy of following? Today the guardians and elders are all here. If you don't wish to follow Kenshin, you can follow us back to the Phoenix clan now. Their voice transmission conversation would not be heard by anyone else. So Divine Phoenix clan leader did not beat around the bush and went straight to the point. Bai Feng was stunned, apparently not expecting the clan leader to be so direct. After muttering to himself for a moment and seriously considering it, he sent a voice transmission to the clan leader and said in a solemn tone, although I have followed Kenshin in name these few years and have no choice but to be loyal to him. But in actual fact, he has always treated me as a friend. Of course, not only me, there are many people under him and they can all be considered as his friends. He would never ask anyone to sacrifice or contribute for him. Instead, he always protects everyone. With such friends and allies, we can completely trust him. Moreover, clan leader, I don't intend to return to the Phoenix clan. I want to continue following Kenshin and help him complete that earth-shattering feat. Bai Feng's voice was low but his tone was firm and unquestionable. Divine Phoenix clan leader could hear his determination and knew that he had finally found a goal to fight for. Kenshin could actually influence the people around him to fight for his goal willingly, even if they had to sacrifice their lives. It was imaginable how terrifying was Kenshin's charisma. Divine Phoenix clan leader fell silent as he looked at Bai Feng with a complicated expression, not knowing what to say. At this moment, Bai Feng bowed to him and did not say anything else. She walked towards the Great Guardian and the 2 elders. In the past, he had a very close relationship with the 2 elders. After not seeing them for so many years, of course he had to greet them and catch up. The leader of the Divine Phoenix tribe thought for a moment before clasping his fists at Ji Tianxing. He solemnly said, Young Master Long Tian, after careful consideration, I have decided to ally with you. After that, He was about to read out the agreement of the alliance to show his sincerity. This way, he could avoid the awkwardness. If he had to swear to the heavens like Nangong Buhua, it would be really embarrassing. Moreover, after swearing to the heavens, the heavenly Tao would sense it, so the phoenixes would not dare to violate the oath easily. That was equivalent to putting shackles on the phoenixes. They would be completely passive and would no longer have a chance to bargain. However, before the Divine Phoenix clan leader could read the agreement, Ji Tianxing waved his hand and a beam of white light landed in front of him. Within the white light was a jade slip, which recorded the oath of the heavenly Tao that had been changed into a covenant. Since the Divine Phoenix clan leader has the sincerity to form an alliance, everyone should be treated equally. Only then will it be fair. What do you think? Ji Tianxing looked at the Divine Phoenix clan leader with a smile. His tone was casual, but there was a hint of irrefutability in it. The Divine Phoenix clan leader frowned. His pupils constricted, and he was a little unhappy. However, since things had come to this, he could not back down. If he insisted on resisting, the situation would become even worse. The other clan leaders and sect masters were all looking at him expectantly, waiting for him to make a decision. After hesitating for a while, the Divine Phoenix clan leader chose to believe by phone. He gritted his teeth and made up his mind. He picked up the jade slip and read out the agreement that Ji Tianxing had made in a low voice according to the contents inside. This agreement was basically the same as what Nangong Buhua had read out. It was also close to 1,000 words long, and it sounded like all kinds of restrictions and restrictions. After the Divine Phoenix clan leader finished reading the agreement, the phoenixes were considered to have been trapped by Ji Tianxing. They would not dare to betray him or go against him. Unless the phoenixes were not afraid of being punished by the heavenly Tao. Boom! Boom! After the Divine Phoenix clan leader finished reading the agreement, thunder rumbled in the sky above the light palace. A wisp of Tao runes appeared above his head, and his whole body was covered in a layer of golden light. Everyone in the palace saw this scene and felt the vast power of the heavenly Tao. They were all curious and shocked. Ji Tianxing kept saying that the Divine Phoenix clan leader's sincerity had moved the heavens. However, the Divine Kings present all knew that things were definitely not that simple. Nangong Buhua and the Divine Phoenix clan leader swore to the heavens. The content of the oath was recognized by the heavenly Tao, and it became a heavenly Tao oath. Whoever dared to go against the oath would have to consider whether they could withstand the punishment of the heavenly Tao. At that thought, the clan leaders and sect masters' eyes dimmed. They were nervous and hesitant. After the heavenly Tao oath's phenomenon ended, the Divine Phoenix clan leader knew that the outcome was set. There was no turning back. He felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders, and he let out a long sigh. Ji Tianxing continued his previous performance. He seemed to be very touched as he said, "The Divine Phoenix clan leader's sincerity in forming an alliance with me has moved the heavens and attracted the heavenly Tao to witness it. It's really commendable. I agree to form an alliance with the Phoenix clan. From now on, we will help each other and live and die together. When we succeed in the future, the Fuchuan region will be ruled by the Phoenix clan. The Phoenix clan will also be able to develop their forces and industries in the surrounding 10 regions." There was no surprise or joy in this outcome. The benefits that the Phoenix clan received were exactly the same as the Nangong clan. The Divine Phoenix clan leader forced a smile and thanked Ji Tianxing. Then, he returned to his seat and did not say anything else. It was obvious that the old man's expression was gloomy. He simply closed his eyes and rested. The Phoenix clan's alliance was successful. Next was the Lan clan's turn. Lan Wuji knew that he could not change the outcome. However, he could not just leave. He could only accept his fate. He stood up decisively and expressed his willingness to form an alliance. Then, he read out the agreement that Ji Tianxing had taken out. His swift and decisive actions caused everyone to have a whole new level of respect for him. A smile also appeared on Ji Tianxing's face. After Lan Wuji read out the oath, there was another scene of thunder and Tao runes. Ji Tianxing acted as usual. He promised the Lan clan the same benefits as the Nangong clan and the Phoenix clan. Lan Wuji smiled and thanked him. Then, He handed the jade slip to Jiang Chuyun, who was beside him. Jiang Chuyun looked at the jade slip in front of him and the smiling and amiable Lan Wuji. He was so angry that his nose almost went crooked. The Divine Phoenix clan leader and Lan Wuji were respected seniors. They could only accept it when Nangong Buhua forced them to do so. However, it was not certain who would be the next to read out the alliance agreement. Now, Lan Wuji handed it to him directly. He could not accept it, but he could not refuse it either. However, when Lan Wuji saw his hesitation, he smiled and said, "Clan leader Jiang, it's your turn. Don't worry. Everyone's alliance agreement is the same. Just read it." Chapter 4078. F***CK. Hearing Lan Wuji's words, Jiang Chuyun's face almost turned black. Despicable old fox. Jiang Chuyun cursed in his heart. He could only brace himself and accept the jade slip. Back then, before Ji Tianxing left the divine world, something unpleasant had happened in the Jiang clan. At that time, Jiang Chuyun was afraid of Jin Shuang and her army, so he had no choice but to offend Ji Tianxing. But since then, he swore to himself that he would never offend Ji Tianxing again. He also couldn't give Ji Tianxing a bad impression. Otherwise, he would ruin the relationship between Kenshin and the Jiang clan. Therefore, he took the jade slip, took a deep breath, and began to read the alliance agreement. The contents of the alliance agreement didn't change much. After reading it, thunder rumbled and daoist rhymes appeared. His whole body was covered in golden light. Those in the know knew that it was a heavenly oath. Those who didn't know would think that he was going to ascend after being rewarded by the heavens. When the daoist rhymes dissipated and the thunder stopped, the alliance agreement between the Jiang clan and Ji Tianxing was completed. As usual, Ji Tianxing was touched and promised the Jiang clan the same benefits. He still controlled a region and allowed them to develop their forces in the surrounding 10 regions. After the Jiang clan's matter was settled, Jiang Chuyun looked at the jade slip in his hand and then at the Battle God clan's leader. It was unknown whether it was because Jiang Chuyun had a high EQ and didn't want to offend others. Or was it because the Battle God clan's leader's 6-meter-tall body was as majestic as an iron tower and was too oppressive? In short, Jiang Chuyun returned the jade slip to Ji Tianxing and didn't hand it to the Battle God clan's leader. But what everyone didn't expect was that when the jade slip flew to Ji Tianxing, the Battle God clan's leader waved his hand and shot out a golden light, taking the jade slip. He held the jade slip in his hand and didn't hurry to read the alliance agreement. Instead, he said to Ji Tianxing, "Brother Long Tian, do you still remember our agreement?" Ji Tianxing smiled and nodded. He asked, "Brother Zhon is referring to having me spar with the brothers from the War God clan?" The Battle God clan leader smiled and explained, "It's good that Brother Long still remembers. However, it can't be considered a spar. I just hope that when you are free, you can give us some pointers." Ji Tianxing's smile was still gentle as he said, "No problem. It's a good thing for everyone to learn from each other and improve." Seeing that he had agreed, the War God clan leader no longer had any doubts. He immediately picked up the jade slip and read out the alliance agreement. Originally, this was a treaty that would make all the patriarchs and sect masters depressed. Normally, as they read it, their expressions would become serious and their moods would become very sullen. However, the War God clan patriarch's thunderous voice actually sounded impassioned and hot-blooded, as if he was about to die heroically. As his body lit up with golden light, daoist rhymes appeared above his head. When the heavenly thunder rumbled in the sky, his aura reached its peak. The golden armor on his body shone brightly. That scene, that aura, it was as if he was about to go into battle to kill the enemy. The patriarchs and sect masters who had yet to read out the alliance agreement looked at each other in dismay. They communicated privately and almost cursed out loud. These old fellows, each one is more shrewd than the other. That's right. They are all fellows who sail according to the wind. Previously, they were still thinking about how to negotiate, but in the end, they admitted defeat faster than anyone else. Each one of them is really unique. When it's our turn, if we don't do something new, I'm afraid we won't be able to leave a deep impression on the Kenshin. Today, of the 8 forces that came to the Radiant Palace, the Foam clan, the Lan clan, the Jiang clan, and the War God clan had already expressed their stance and formed an alliance with the Kenshin. Only the 100 Refinement Ancient Sect, the Shimi Paradise, the Raging Flame Paradise, and the Shia clan had yet to express their stance. Unfortunately, the 4 patriarchs and sect masters were seated next to the War God clan's patriarch. As for the War God clan leader, he had a valiant personality and was never afraid of offending others. He was a true battle maniac. After Ji Tianxing promised the War God clan benefits in front of everyone, the War God clan leader threw the jade slip to the Yuchi clan leader beside him. The Yuchi clan occupied the Raging Flame Grotto within the Raging Wind region. The dark-skinned and muscular Yuchi clan leader held the jade slip with an aggrieved expression. He looked at the Iron Tower like War God clan leader and originally wanted to grumble a little, but he still held it in. Things had already developed to such a stage, and if they were to incur enmity with the War God clan and make the Kenshin see them in a different light, that wasn't a wise move. Hence, Yuchi clan leader could only bear with his grievances as he read out the alliance agreement in a lively voice. The originally dull and rigid alliance agreement content was read out in cadence by that emotional voice of his, rising and falling, which made one's blood boil. The few clan leaders and many strong practitioners were all smiling as they looked at him, their expressions and gazes were somewhat amused. The few forces who had already formed an alliance were all thinking in their hearts that they had all been trapped, so don't even think of escaping. The 3 forces who had not read out the alliance agreement were muttering in their hearts. "Old fellow, you're putting in so much effort, don't you feel that you're exaggerating? You're at least the Yuchi clan leader, a 9th stage Realm God King expert. Where's your face? Most importantly, you've already displayed everything that you can, so what should we do?" Half a quarter of an hour later, Yuchi clan leader finished reading out the alliance agreement and obtained Heavenly Dao's verification. Ji Tianxing also promised benefits in front of everyone. There weren't any surprises and the treatment was the same as the previous few forces. Yuchi clan leader was still hesitating whether to return the jade token to Ji Tianxing or pass it to Cave Lord Shimi, who was beside him. Cave Lord Shimi was naturally the owner of Shimi Grotto Heaven. This force originated from ancient times and was most adept at scouting for information, possessing one of the top intelligence forces in the boundless Heaven continent. Immediately following that, something that made everyone surprised happened. Yuchi clan leader had yet to decide who to pass the jade token to when Cave Lord Shimi stood up and spoke out clearly, "There's no need for the jade token. Earlier I heard the few clan leaders read it out and this seat has already memorized it." After that, he started to read out the alliance agreement, which was over 1,000 words based on his memory. Many god kings in the main hall were shocked. "There's such a thing. Impressive, impressive. Sure enough, it's unique and unique. You bastards, you've really racked your brains and put in a lot of effort. Walking the path of others and leaving them with no way out. It's over, we have one less path left. We have to quickly think of a way." The few forces that had already formed an alliance were all smiling as they watched the show and commented. The 2 forces that had yet to form an alliance were becoming more and more anxious as they racked their brains to think of a new idea. Not long after, Cave Lord Shimi finished reading the alliance agreement. There were close to 1,000 words of content, and not a single word was missing. The few elders and protectors of Shimi Grotto Heaven clapped their hands with pride. The people of 100 Refinement Ancient Sect and Shia clan were even more dumbfounded, and their expressions became even weirder. What was there to applaud and be proud of in such a humiliating and sullen way of forming an alliance? Weren't they all full of confidence and arrogance before coming here, insisting on scraping off a few layers of Kenshin's skin? Why were all of them so shameless now? Chapter 4079. Cave Lord Shimi's body emitted a golden light, and a Tao rhythm appeared above his head. Ji Tianxing was too lazy to continue acting. He did not even feel touched and directly promised to give Shimi Eden benefits. After it ended, only the 100 Refinement Ancient Sect and the Shia clan remained. Everyone's gaze landed on Shu Bai Lian and Shia clan head. Everyone wanted to see who would be the first to announce the alliance agreement. In the end, Shu Bai Lian's skin was thick enough. While Shia clan head was still hesitating, he stood up. He looked at Ji Tianxing and asked, "Kenshin, you haven't forgotten our previous agreement, right? Once he said that, Xia clan head quivered. He looked at Shu Bai Lian with a gaze filled with anger and jealousy. He thought in his heart, damn it. You old foxes, when did you contact Kenshin beforehand and even discuss the conditions? Before today, I have never even met Kenshin. I didn't even discuss any additional conditions. Isn't this a huge loss? Ji Tianxing nodded at Shu Bai Lian and said calmly, after today's alliance, I can immediately fulfill our previous agreement. Hearing such a sincere reply, Shu Bai Lian was completely relieved. He no longer hesitated. He picked up the jade letter and started reading the alliance agreement. Not long after, he finished reading the alliance agreement and officially formed an alliance with Ji Tianxing. After the heaven and earth anomaly ended, Ji Tianxing also promised in front of everyone that he would reward the 100 refinement ancient sect with a piece of land and allow them to develop their forces in the surrounding 10 regions. The 100 refinement ancient sect had also successfully formed an alliance. Only the Xia clan was left in the hall, becoming the focus of everyone. Everyone understood that since the situation had developed to this stage, Kenshin's power had already been established. The Xia clan could not resist and could only agree. At this point, if Xia clan head still wanted to discuss any conditions, he would only be humiliating himself. Furthermore, he had to think of something new. If he could not think of any good ideas, directly reading the alliance agreement would be too boring. Everyone had such thoughts as they quietly looked at Xia clan head, waiting to see how he would act. To everyone's surprise, clan leader Xia gave them a pleasant surprise. He held the jade slip in his hand, but he was not in a hurry to read the treaty. Instead, he said to Ji Tianxing, Kenshin, you went to the Xia clan more than 1,000 years ago. During that exchange of pointers, my Xia clan's disciples were not as skilled as others, and many of them were injured. Since then, there has been no interaction between us. Logically speaking, you don't owe the Xia clan a debt of gratitude, but this time, when you raised your arm and called for help, this seat still rushed over to support you. In my opinion, you should show some kind of reaction, no matter how you look at it. Only then will I be able to appease my clansmen, especially those who were injured by you. No one would have thought that Xia clan head would be so stubborn at the last moment and make a request to Ji Tianxing. Even though Xia clan leader had already softened his tone and lowered his demands. However, in the eyes of many experts, this was very unwise. If Ji Tianxing rejected him, then the Xia clan would be in an awkward position. Fortunately, Ji Tianxing did not get angry, nor did he reject him in front of everyone. He asked calmly, what request does clan leader Xia have? If it's not too excessive, this seat can consider it. Seeing that he had relented, clan leader Xia was obviously relieved. The other leaders who had already formed an alliance felt unbalanced. They envied clan leader Xia for daring to say this, but they were also worried that the Xia clan would gain more benefits because of this. Clan leader Xia pondered for a moment, then discussed with the protectors and elders. Only then did he say, Kenshin, our Xia clan is located in a remote corner of the Dong'an region. That region is relatively barren, and cultivation resources are scarce. However, the neighboring Juxiong region has more abundant cultivation resources. Therefore, we hope that after we complete our mission, we can control the Dong'an region and Juxiong region. Clan leader Xia was very smart. He did not open his mouth like a lion and ask for 7 or 8 regions like he had imagined. He only wanted one of the surrounding regions. It was not too excessive, and he could still gain enough benefits. However, before he could finish speaking, he was interrupted by Ji Tianxing. Clan leader Xia, your request is a bit excessive. Ji Tianxing raised his hand and pointed at Nangong Buhua, Lan Wuji, and the clan leader of the Divine Phoenix clan. He said in a dignified tone, today, this seat will treat all the clans and sects equally. There will be no discrimination. This seat will also promise everyone the same benefits, including the Nangong clan. If this seat is extra generous and gives the Xia clan an extra region, what will these friends of the clans and sects think? Nangong Buhua, Nangong Nihuang, and the others were the first to express their agreement. That's right. Young Master Long Tian has always been fair and just. I hope that clan leader Xia will not break the rules. Xia clan leader, may I take the liberty to say something? If everyone is like you and asks for more territory from the sword god, how would the sword god deal with it? Can you still guarantee fairness? I'm afraid that no matter how the Kenshin distributes the territories, everyone will have resentment in their hearts. Furthermore, we have just formed an alliance today and have to face countless dangers and killings. We haven't achieved anything yet we are asking for territories here. I'm afraid it's not appropriate, right? After the people of the Nangong clan finished speaking, the clan leader of the Divine Phoenix clan, Lan Wuji, and Shu Bai Lian also expressed their opinions. Everyone was treated the same, so of course, they would not agree to the Xia clan getting an extra region. The Xia clan leader was speechless and his expression turned ugly. The protectors and elders of the Xia clan were also enraged. They felt ashamed and resentful. Fortunately, Ji Tianxing spoke in time and gave the Xia clan a way out. Clan leader Xia, I hope you can understand that this seat is giving everyone the same treatment and maintaining fairness. This is for everyone's good. On top of that, I'm afraid you, the patriarchs, and the sect leaders are all confused. There are clearly hundreds of regions in the boundless heaven continent. After we overthrow the rule of the Azura God Emperor, this seat will be able to control all the regions. Under such circumstances, it's not a problem to give each force 3 to 5 regions. Why is this seat so stingy and only give each force 1 region? Without a doubt, this was a question that all the forces were very concerned about. Even Nangong Buhua had doubts in his heart. It was just that he chose to believe in Ji Tianxing and never asked. Everyone looked at Ji Tianxing with burning eyes, waiting for an answer. Ji Tianxing explained with a smile, the reason why we opposed Emperor God Xiao Luo and formed an alliance to overthrow him was because he was able to cover the sky with one hand and monopolize the power, causing the people of the boundless heaven continent to suffer. Our goal is to return peace to the boundless heaven continent and restore the freedom of the people so that all living beings can live and work in peace. If each force can be given several regions, their power will definitely increase exponentially. At that time, it will definitely form a state of fragmentation. After a long time, it will be inevitable that there will be friction and conflicts. If a war were to break out, the common people would suffer again. Even if we overthrow the rule of the Azura God Emperor, we will also bring war. What's the point of our alliance then? Chapter 4080. The divine kings in the hall were all smart people. When Ji Tianxing said it, everyone understood. He wanted to strictly control the power of the various clans and not allow the situation of the heroes separating themselves to appear. Only then could he ensure the peace of the boundless heaven continent. Some people agreed with this, but there were also people who objected to it. Shu Bailian frowned and asked, Kenshin, when the time comes, you'll be the overlord of the boundless heaven continent. With you overseeing this place, the various clans and top forces won't dare to wantonly start a war, right? This question asked the hearts of many powerhouses. Many people nodded in agreement. Ji Tianxing smiled and explained, I've long guessed that you all would think this way. But do you all think that my goal is only to save the boundless heaven continent? There's also the Reincarnation Island, Firmament, Chenkuan, and the Primal Chaos Continent. They're all under the dark rule of the 4 great god emperors. The people of those 4 continents also yearn for light and freedom. Hearing this, everyone was shocked. They all revealed expressions of disbelief. Some people even sucked in a cold breath. Very clearly, Ji Tianxing was saying that not only did he want to save the boundless heaven continent, but he also wanted to save the entire divine realm. He wanted to overthrow the rule of the 5 great god emperors and completely start a war with the 5 great god emperors. What kind of breadth of mind and boldness was this? Naturally, if Ji Tianxing saved the 5 continents and controlled the entire divine realm, he would be too busy. There were still many things to do. It was simply impossible for him to oversee the boundless heaven continent. In this way, it made sense for him to deliberately suppress the power of the various clans. The few clan leaders and sect masters were silent. Clan leader Xia was also speechless. He still felt a little sullen. He wanted to fight for more benefits for the Xia clan, but he did not know what to say. Fortunately, Ji Tianxing was more understanding and did not let clan leader Xia be embarrassed for too long. He continued, originally, We've only taken the first step in the plan to get rid of the rebels. I didn't want to tell everyone about this so early and so hastily. But since everyone has asked here, there's no harm in letting you know in advance. Clan leader Shia, I can't fulfill the conditions you requested. However, this seat can help the Shia clan by correcting their cultivation techniques and secret manuals. I can also give pointers to a few promising talents. What do you think? If it were any other godly king who said that he wanted to help the Shia clan revise their secret scriptures, the Shia clan would definitely suspect that the other party was trying to steal the Shia clan's inherited cultivation technique. However, none of the experts present would doubt Ji Tianxing's word. After all, the various factions did not produce a peak divine king. Kenshin was a peak divine king 1,000 years ago. Now, he had returned to the peak. Would he still fancy those low-level cultivation method manuals? From another point of view, Kenshin helping the Shia clan revise their cultivation techniques was definitely a huge profit for the Shia clan. What's more, Kenshin had even promised to give pointers to the Shia clan's talents. Everyone present knew that anyone who could receive Kenshin's personal guidance, as long as they weren't a blockhead, would soar to the sky. For example, Bai Feng of the Phoenix clan was a living example. Didn't you see that Bai Feng was already dead set on following Kenshin? She didn't even want to return to the divine Phoenix Grotto Heaven. Although Ji Tianxing's promise was very beneficial to the Shia clan, it wasn't too unreasonable. The other 7 factions wouldn't be jealous either. It was the best of both worlds. The Shia clan head also knew how to act appropriately. He accepted Ji Tianxing's promise and bowed to express his gratitude. Next, he took out the jade letter and read the alliance agreement in front of everyone. After he finished reading the alliance agreement, the contents of the oath were approved by the heavenly Tao. His entire body lit up with golden light. Tao rhythms appeared above his head. Thunder boomed above the divine light palace. Ji Tianxing followed the procedure and made a promise in front of everyone. He would reward the Shia clan with a piece of land and allow the Shia clan to develop their forces and businesses in the surrounding 10 regions. At this point, the 9 factions, including the Nangong clan, had formed an alliance with Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing, the 9 clan heads, and the sect head bowed and thanked each other. They all called each other brothers and chatted with each other. No matter how many thoughts they had previously, they all smiled and wiped away their enmity. They appeared to be very harmonious and united. Next, everyone began to discuss the specific plan of action. The leader of the rebel alliance was naturally Ji Tianxing. The deputy leader was, of course, Nangong Buhua. Ji Tianxing had the authority to control and deploy the 9 factions. He also had the obligation to protect the 9 factions from being destroyed. However, the specific plan of action and where to start dealing with the powerhouses under the Azura God Emperor was still up for discussion. After an hour of discussion, the leaders of the few factions all agreed that it was a good choice to start from the Yenshu Grotto Heaven. Each faction would use half a month to bring their own elites, at least 1,000-strong army, to the Yenshu Grotto Heaven. Then, Ji Tianxing would lead everyone to take the initiative to sweep through the various regions and eliminate the forces under the Azura God Emperor. Ji Tianxing and Nangong Buhua didn't express their opinions. In fact, they didn't agree with everyone's suggestion. This was because they both knew that each faction didn't want to be alone. They would rather stay together for protection. However, this wasn't efficient at all. As long as the Meng Shuai and the Imperial Tutor weren't stupid, they could easily come up with a countermeasure. Seeing that the 6 clan leaders and suzerain had reached a consensus, only the Divine Phoenix clan leader and Lan Wuji remained silent and didn't express their opinions. According to the principle of majority rule, they naturally had to listen to the 6 clan leaders and suzerain's suggestion and act together. However, in this alliance, Ji Tianxing was the leader. He had the absolute right to speak. There were no principles or rules. Seeing that everyone was still discussing, Ji Tianxing raised his hand to signal for everyone to be quiet. He said in a dignified tone, "Although it's safe to act together and our forces are concentrated, it's inefficient. We need to defeat the Meng Shuai and the Imperial Tutor as soon as possible. If we drag this out and give them enough time to plan, it'll be more difficult for us to act. Therefore, I've decided to split into two groups. One group will be led by me, followed by the Phoenix clan, the 100 Smelting Ancient Sect, and the Yuchi clan. The other group will be led by Nangong Buhua, followed by the Lan clan, the Battle God clan, the Xia clan, the Shimi Grotto Heaven, and the Jiang clan. Hearing Ji Tianxing's arrangement, the leaders of the 8 factions were confused. Ji Tianxing was only leading 3 clans, but Nangong Buhua was leading 4 clans and the 100 Smelting Ancient Sect. Everyone frowned and pondered. What was his intention? Did he think that he was strong enough to take on the other 5 clans and the 100 Smelting Ancient Sect with only 3 clans? Furthermore, the Lan clan, the Battle God clan, and the Jiang clan were obviously loyal to him, but he arranged for them to be under Nangong Buhua's command. Was he trying to stabilize the situation so that Nangong Buhua wouldn't be able to control them? After all, the Lan clan, the Battle God clan, and the Jiang clan wouldn't make things difficult for Nangong Buhua because of him. Thinking of this, the leaders of the various factions were relieved. Then, Nangong Buhua asked in a serious tone, "Alliance leader, other than eliminating the forces under the Azura God Emperor, do we need to attack the leaders of the various regions?" Chapter 4081. Nangong Buhua's question was also the concern of the clan leaders and sect masters. Ji Tianxing already had an answer in his heart and answered without hesitation, "If those territorial masters obstruct or resist, we will try our best to capture them. If there is no way to kill them. If those territorial masters know what's good for them, there is no need to make things difficult for them. After all, after the Azura God Emperor's rule is overthrown, the 100 territories still need those territorial masters to maintain peace and stability." His answer laid out the bottom line and the criteria for the operation of quelling rebels. Nangong Buhua and the 8 leaders cupped their fists and bowed, acknowledging the order. The meeting was about to come to an end. The leaders of the 8 forces stayed behind and sent messages back to their respective clans and sects to gather their elite disciples at the Yenshu Grotto Heaven. Ji Tianxing had also set a rule for the gathering of people to prevent them from being selfish and unwilling to put in more effort. Each force had to gather at least 1,000 people, of which there should be no less than 20 divine kings and 200 upper divine lord. This was a high requirement, but it was not too harsh. At least, the 8 forces and the Nangong clan all met this requirement. Of course, if the 9 forces met this requirement, there would still be a small number of divine kings and upper divine lords left to guard their grotto heavens. Seeing that the matter was settled, everyone was about to disperse and leave the Great Light Hall. At this moment, a guard's voice came from outside the Great Light Hall, and the door opened with a creaking sound. A silver-armored messenger guard held a jade slip with a solemn expression and quickly stepped into the Great Light Hall, heading straight for Ji Tianxing. Suddenly, the atmosphere in the Great Light Hall became heavy. Everyone's eyes were focused on the messenger guard, and a bad premonition arose in their hearts. As expected, the messenger guard came to the steps of the throne and knelt on one knee, reporting to Ji Tianxing, "Alliance Master, I have just received a message from the front, please take a look." This person was the captain of the guards, and he was very clever. Seeing that the experts of the various forces were present, he did not directly explain what had happened. The leaders of the 8 forces were somewhat displeased, but there was nothing wrong with that. They only hoped that after Ji Tianxing looked at the information in the jade strip, he would let them know about it. Unexpectedly, Ji Tianxing didn't take the communication jade slip. He said calmly, "Today, we are all allies, allies worthy of trust and reliance." As long as it was military news and did not involve personal secrets, there was no harm in speaking directly. After all, timely communication and discussion is the foundation of trust. The messenger guard was startled for a moment, and then a look of admiration appeared in his eyes. Nangong Buhua was the first to applaud. Lan Wuji, the divine Phoenix clan leader, Jiang Chuyun, and the others all nodded in agreement. It was obvious that Ji Tianxing's words had touched the bottom of their hearts, and it was also what they wanted to hear the most. The messenger guard no longer hesitated. He held the jade slip with both hands and read in a serious tone, "Last night, we received accurate news that our 9th Elder and 8th Elder were unfortunately captured by Meng Shuai and Qi Yang in the process of carrying out a mission." After hearing the news, the hall fell silent for a moment, And then there was a burst of low voices and discussions. The people of the various large clans and the 100 Refinement ancient sect did not know the inside story, but the people of the Nangong clan knew very well. The 9th elder, Nangong Ao, and the 8th elder had been ordered by Ji Tianxing to carry out a mission and help Ji Tianxing draw up a death list. This required the 2 elders to risk their lives and do their best to gather information. The death list was also very important. It was the guiding light of the Rebel Alliance, and it could save a lot of time for everyone to carry out their mission. Now, the mission was only halfway done, and Nangong Ao and the 8th elder had been captured at the same time. Without a doubt, the mission of drawing up a death list could not be carried out. The leaders of the various clans all asked Nangong Buhua what had happened. Nangong Buhua could only explain that Ji Tianxing had been planning and preparing for more than a month ago. Nangong Ao and the 8th elder had led 80% of the Nangong clan's intelligence network to draw up a death list. All the God Kings present knew that the capture of the 2 elders at this time would cause a lot of damage to the operation. At this moment, everyone was worried, and they could not help but discuss in low voices. "Sigh, this is really a bad start." "That's right. We just came up with a plan, but we haven't even started, and we've already met with such a setback." No wonder the Meng Shuai and the Imperial Tutor did not make any big moves in the past 2 months when they sensed the danger. It turns out that they secretly took action and caught our eyes first. The Meng Shuai and Qi Yang are very cunning. They only captured the 2 elders of the Nangong clan and did not kill them directly. This way, we will be in a passive position and will not be able to fight back. Seeing that everyone was discussing, Ji Tianxing said in a dignified tone, "Everyone, do not worry. We have only just started our operation, and this setback is expected. When we officially take action in the future, who knows how much more danger and killing we will encounter. It will be even more intense than this." Hearing this, everyone thought that it made sense, so they stopped talking and looked at him, waiting for his decision. Ji Tianxing continued, "The Meng Shuai and the Imperial Tutor are both cunning foxes. They chose to capture Nangong Ao and the 8th elder alive, so they must have a follow-up plan. Although Nangong Ao is my friend, and I am worried about his safety, we must not panic. But we can't lose our footing. Let's keep calm and see how Meng Shuai and the Imperial Preceptor make their moves before we make a decision. In addition, there are several ancient clans and dozens of top factions who are still watching the situation and wavering. Today's incident is the first test we have to solve. If we can't even pass this test, how are we going to deal with the Meng Shuai and the Imperial Tutor? If we can successfully pass this trial, the clans and forces that are watching from the sidelines should have more confidence in us." After listening to his analysis, the clan leaders and sect masters calmed down and stopped worrying. The clan leaders thought of a question, and one of them asked, "Alliance leader, if this old man is so bold as to ask, what will you do if more ancient clans and sects come to join you and want to form an alliance with you after we resolve this crisis?" When Lan Wuji asked this question, the hall fell silent. Everyone looked at Ji Tianxing, waiting for his answer. Ji Tianxing answered without hesitation, "The goal of our alliance is to overthrow the Shura God Emperor's rule and save the people of the boundless heaven continent. If those ancient clans and factions also come for this goal, I welcome like-minded people to join. However, they have already exceeded the 1-month deadline I gave them. Therefore, in my heart, the treatment that they receive is absolutely not as important as the treatment that everyone present receives." Chapter 4082. Ji Tianxing's words were rather general and did not have a specific standard. But Lan Wuji, the patriarchs, and sect masters felt inexplicably much better when they heard this. Although the treatment and benefits we received were far from what we had originally expected, we formed the first alliance with Kenyan. However, since we were the first to form an alliance with the Sword God, we are naturally the people he trusts the most. We took a huge risk and took a gamble to be the first to form an alliance with Kenshin. This is the treatment we deserve. Those clans and forces that joined later can't be compared to us. Such a thought flashed through the minds of the experts. Now that things had come to this, the remaining worries in everyone's hearts dissipated. Ji Tianxing waved his hand to dismiss the messenger guard and said to the patriarchs and sect masters, "I will deal with the matter of the 2 elders being captured. You all act according to the original plan and do not delay. The patriarch of the Divine Phoenix clan, Lan Wuji, and the others all bowed and said yes in unison before leaving the light hall one after another. As they left, the patriarchs were still discussing something in low voices. On the other side, the internal affairs elder of the Nangong clan had already arranged accommodations for the experts of the 8 forces. The experts of each force lived in a palace and kept a distance from each other. After the people of the 8 forces had left, the elders of the Nangong clan also left one after another. In the light hall, only Ji Tianxing, Nangong Buhua, and Nangong Nihuang were left. It was only now that Ji Tianxing frowned, his face became grave, and a trace of worry flashed across his eyes. Nangong Nihuang could not help but say, "Young master, are you worried about Nangong Ao and the 8th elder?" Ji Tianxing nodded, indicating that he agreed. Nangong Nihuang comforted in a gentle voice, "Don't worry, didn't you just say it? Meng Shuai and Qi Yang naturally have other intentions for capturing them alive, so they will not be in danger for the time being." Nangong Buhua shook his head and said in a heavy tone, "This should be just young Master Long's words to comfort people. The 2 elders are only safe for the time being. Furthermore, Nangong Ao may not die, but the 8th elder may not." Nangong Nihuang immediately frowned and asked worriedly and doubtfully, "Why?" Ji Tianxing explained, "The Meng Shuai and the imperial tutor are not so small. They will not target the 2 elders. Their target is me. Nangong Ao is my friend, and he is still useful to the Meng Shuai and the imperial tutor, but the 8th elder." Nangong Nihuang was smart and immediately understood what he meant. "Young master, you mean, if Meng Shuai and the Emperor's preceptor want to extort a confession by torture or intimidate us, they will definitely choose to kill the 8th elder. Will they keep Nangong Ao and use his life to force you to show yourself? Not young master Long Buhua SSS Yongz's young have as. Kill young master S. How sinister and despicable." Nangong Nihuang was so angry that her face was as cold as frost, and her eyes shone with a cold light. Ji Tianxing said calmly, "If I am not wrong, the Meng Shuai will send a message to me within 2 days at the latest. They will use Nangong Ao as a hostage to force me to show myself." Nangong Nihuang's face was full of anxiety. She quickly asked, "Young master, what should we do? Do you have a good plan?" Ji Tianxing smiled coldly and said, "How can I have the best of both worlds when dealing with such a despicable but practical method? I can't sit by and watch Nangong Ao be killed. I must save him. Master Nangong, please organize all the information sent back by the 2 elders and give it to me immediately. I will set out tonight to rescue Nangong Ao." Nangong Buhua and his daughter were both surprised and quickly tried to dissuade him. "No. Absolutely not. Young Master Long, you know that the Meng Shuai will set up a massive ambush and try to kill you. We must not let you die. Young Master, we know that you are very worried about Nangong Ao's safety, but you are the leader of the Rebel Alliance and the hope of all of us. Nothing can happen to you. I believe that even if Nangong Ao knows about this, he will not agree with your decision. Yes. There are no cowards in the Nangong clan. Nangong Ao would rather commit suicide than put you in a desperate situation." Both father and daughter were a little agitated. They blocked Ji Tianxing from both sides, refusing to let him take the risk no matter what. Ji Tianxing was both touched and amused. He quickly comforted the father and daughter and said, "Don't be so emotional. Calm down and think about what I just said. First, with my strength, except for the 5 god emperors, no one can hurt me. Even the Meng Shuai and the imperial tutor together are not enough. Second, the Meng Shuai may need 1 or 2 days to negotiate with me, and I will set out tonight. He will not be prepared at all. I will sneak into their encirclement and rescue Nangong Ao a day or 2 in advance. Of course, the most important thing is that only the 2 of you know about this. You must keep it a secret." After listening to his analysis, Nangong Buhua and Nangong Nihuang finally calmed down. The father and daughter thought about it carefully and realized that it was indeed reasonable. Most of their worries dissipated. Nangong Buhua thought for a moment and said, "Young Master Long, your analysis is very reasonable. I also believe in your strength and means. But this is your prediction. What if the Meng Shuai does not do it? Ji Tianxing smiled and said, "No matter what the Meng Shuai wants to do, I have to rescue Nangong Ao first." Nangong Nihuang said again, "Young master, it is too dangerous for you to act alone. I want to go with you. Nangong Ao is not only your friend, but also my clansman and elder brother." Ji Tianxing turned to look at her and said seriously, "First, I am not alone. My family and friends are all in my God artifact space. Second, it is more secretive for me to act alone. The probability of successfully rescuing Nangong Ao is higher. If there is someone following me, not to mention you, even a ninth heaven realm god king like your father might become a burden." This was another way to tell Nangong Nihuang that she would be a burden if she followed him. She was instantly embarrassed. The father and daughter were still a little worried and wanted to remind Ji Tianxing of something. But Ji Tianxing waved his hand and said solemnly, "Those few clan leaders and Shu Balian will definitely discuss in private how I will solve this problem. I hope you can keep it a secret for me and not let a fourth person know. Besides, when I am not in the Yenshu Grotto Heaven, Nangong family head, you have to preside over the situation. There must not be any trouble." Nangong Buhua knew the seriousness of the matter. The rebel alliance had just been formed and had not been tested. There was no cooperation, tacit understanding, and loyalty. Therefore, the next few days would be a very crucial period. Although it was dangerous for Ji Tianxing to rescue Nangong Ao, it was also very important for him to stay in the Yenshu Grotto Heaven to preside over the situation. Chapter 4083. In the middle of the night, Yenshu Grotto Heaven was in complete silence. Only groups of guards were still patrolling, and no one else was moving around. For the past month, the defense and security of Yenshu Grotto Heaven had been tight. For some reason, the number of patrols and guards had increased by 50% since the evening. Now, the defense of Yenshu Grotto Heaven had reached its peak, and it was impregnable. Many guards guessed that the rebel alliance had just been formed today, and the war was about to begin. That was why they were so nervous. The entire Yenshu Grotto Heaven was filled with a solemn and murderous aura. The 8 families, led by the Feng clan and the Lan clan, were well behaved after staying in their respective palaces. They did not move around as they were busy with their tasks, dispatching their elite disciples to Yenshu Grotto Heaven as soon as possible. Nangong Buhua, Nangong Nihuang and the rest were busy as usual, and there was nothing unusual. As for Chief Ji Tianxing, he returned to the secret room to cultivate in seclusion as usual. But other than Nangong Buhua and his daughter, no one knew about Ji Tianxing's real whereabouts. In fact, he had quietly left Yenshu Grotto Heaven and rushed to the northeast at his fastest speed. In the evening, Nangong Buhua sorted out the information from Nangong Ao and the 8th elder and handed it to Ji Tianxing. The few jade slips recorded the information that the 2 elders had risked their lives to investigate for more than a month. Fortunately, the 2 elders had split up to increase their efficiency. In more than a month, they had used the Nangong clan's intelligence network to investigate more than 60 regions and drew up a death list. According to their speed, they would have completed the task in at most a month's time and produced a complete and detailed death list. But unfortunately, they were caught at this critical juncture. When the 8th elder and Nangong Ao split up, with Yenshu Grotto Heaven as the center line, one headed to the east and the other to the west. The 8th elder was in charge of the southwest and northwest regions, while Nangong Ao was in charge of the southeast and northeast regions. Before Nangong Ao was caught, he was in the Hetien region in the northeast. The information from the Nangong clan also stated that the battle took place in the Hetien region, within the borders of the Golden River Empire. Therefore, Ji Tianxing had a clear goal. After leaving Yenshu's cave, he rushed to Hetien region as fast as he could. His flying speed was very fast, but in order to be even faster, he used the God-slaying battleship. The God-slaying battleship's formations were fully activated. Every 2 hours, it would consume resources worth billions of godstones. It sped towards the northeast at a speed faster than light. Most importantly, when the deity-slaying battleship flew above the sea of clouds, it would not shine with divine light. It would also conceal its tracks and aura. Therefore, Ji Tianxing sped all the way without being discovered by anyone. From the Yenshu cave to the Hetien region, even with the speed of a peak divine king, it would still take 4 days to fly non-stop. However, with the god-slaying battleship at full power, it only took 1.5 days to arrive. Of course, the price he had to pay was also very high. He had consumed more than 100 billion god stones and cultivation resources. This was the entire wealth of many high god kings. If the Nangong clan knew about this, they would definitely be shocked and touched. Early in the morning, when the sun rose, the god-slaying battleship arrived at the Hetian region and was about to enter the territory of the Golden River Empire. Ji Tianxing had predicted that the Meng Shuai would send a message to the Nangong clan 1 day later. In fact, he had overestimated the Meng Shuai's efficiency. After 1.5 days, the Nangong clan finally received a message from the Meng Shuai. After receiving the message, Nangong Buhua did not waste any time and immediately forwarded it to Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing had just entered the territory of the Golden River Empire when he received the message from Nangong Buhua. After reading the message, he immediately frowned. His face was somewhat gloomy, and his eyes flashed with cold, killing intent. The situation was just as he had expected. The patrol commander Qi Yang was in the northwest. After capturing the 8th elder, he interrogated him for 2 days and 2 nights, and then killed him. The 8th elder was beheaded in public, and his corpse was still hanging outside the capital of an empire. After capturing Nangong Ao in the Hatian region, the Meng Shuai left that very night. Now, the Meng Shuai was using Nangong Ao's life to threaten the Nangong clan to hand over the Kenshin. Of course, the Meng Shuai also guessed that the Nangong clan would not exchange Kenshin's life for Nangong Ao's. Therefore, the Meng Shuai purposely left an address and target to lure the Nangong clan and the Kenshin to take revenge. The Meng Shuai announced that at noon on the 14th of April, he would publicly execute Nangong Ao outside the capital of the true martial domain, the true martial empire. In order to punish the traitor, he would torture Nangong Ao by 1,000 cuts and refine him with soul fire. This was the only way to warn the various forces of the boundless heaven continent and intimidate the traitors. After hearing this news, Ji Tianxing understood that the Meng Shuai and the imperial tutor had planned to set up an inescapable net in the true martial domain. Damn it! I miscalculated. Their trap is not in the Hetian region, but in the true martial domain. When Ji Tianxing and Nangong Buhua were discussing countermeasures, they did not consider this detail. As a result, he spent hundreds of billions of god stones to rush to the Hetian region as quickly as possible, only to end up empty-handed. This also meant that the Meng Shuai and the imperial tutor were very cunning and difficult to deal with. Fortunately, it was not a big problem. Ji Tianxing steered the deity-slaying battleship and continued to fly north. He calculated silently, the 14th of April, which is 7 days later. The true martial domain is in the north, very close to the headquarters of the Meng Shuai and the imperial tutor. Under normal circumstances, if I bring Nangong Buhua and the rest from the Yenshu Grotto Heaven to the true martial domain, we can reach there in 7 days. If we relax or slow down, we might not be able to rescue Nangong Ao in time. The Meng Shuai's deadline is very accurate. Fortunately, Ji Tianxing had acted in advance and arrived at the Hetian region at an unimaginable speed. If he flew north for another day, he would reach the true martial domain. This was his biggest advantage. If he did not leave the Yenshu Grotto Heaven in advance, he would not have a secret weapon like the deity-slaying battleship. Then, he would have fallen into the Meng Shuai's trap and rushed to the true martial domain with Nangong Buhua and the rest, only to fall into the trap and be ambushed from all sides. As he steered the deity-slaying battleship towards the north, Ji Tianxing sent a message to Nangong Buhua. I have arrived at the Hetian region and am on my way to the true martial domain. This matter is in the bag, you don't have to worry. Also, act according to the original plan. We must deceive everyone. Not long after, Nangong Buhua received his message and immediately gathered all the clan leaders and suzerains to the Great Light Hall for a meeting. At the same time, Ji Tianxing, who had been cultivating in seclusion in the secret chamber, walked out of the secret chamber and stepped into the Great Light Hall. Chapter 4084. Within 15 minutes, more than 40 God King experts had gathered in the Great Light Hall. The doors were closed and the guards were guarding the hall. The atmosphere in the hall was very solemn. Ji Tianxing, who was dressed in a white robe and wearing a jade crown, sat on the throne. Nangong Buhua, the 7 clan leaders, and Shu Balian sat on his left and right. Everyone who was supposed to be here was present. Ji Tianxing asked solemnly, "Nangong family head, you said that there was an urgent matter that needed everyone to discuss. What happened?" Nangong Buhua quickly got up and bowed. He reported, "Alliance Master, I just received an ultimatum from the Meng Shuai. The situation is just as you expected. Inspector Commander Qi Yang has killed our clan's 8th elder. The Meng Shuai has imprisoned our 9th elder and brought him to the true martial region. He will be beheaded on the 14th of April. Next, Ji Tianxing, the clan leaders, and the sect leaders started to discuss countermeasures. Everyone was in a heavy mood. They were worried and angry. They were all advising Ji Tianxing and discussing seriously. No one noticed anything strange about Alliance Master Ji Tianxing, who was sitting at the head of the table. After all, the Divine Phoenix clan leader, Lan Wuji, and Shu Balian were all 9th stage god kings. None of them was a peak god king. Only Nangong Buhua and Nangong Nihuang knew that the real Ji Tianxing had arrived in the He-Tien region long ago. The Kenshin sitting on the throne was actually a doppelganger left behind by Ji Tianxing. The doppelganger was exactly the same as Ji Tianxing. There was no difference in body or soul aura. Not to mention the 7 clan leaders and Shu Balian, even Nangong Buhua and Nangong Nihuang could not tell who was real and who was fake. In fact, the doppelganger only had half of the original's strength. Even so, Ji Tianxing's doppelganger was stronger than an ordinary peak god king. With the strength realms of these divine king powerhouses in the Great Hall, how could they possibly see through any clues? Not long after, the various patriarchs and sect masters came up with a plan with Ji Tianxing. Everyone continued to carry out their mission. They gathered their men and waited for news in the cave of Yenshu. Ji Tianxing would personally head to the true martial domain to rescue Nangong Ao. Although everyone was very worried about his safety, they repeatedly advised him not to put himself in danger. However, he insisted that Nangong Ao was his friend and ally. Since everyone had formed an alliance, they could not easily give up on anyone. No matter how dangerous it was, he had to save Nangong Ao. Of course, these words touched the experts of the various clans and sects, making them feel that this alliance was a wise choice. Thus, an hour later, Nangong Buhua, the clan leader of the Divine Phoenix clan, Lan Wuji, and more than 30 experts from the 9 forces escorted Ji Tianxing out of Yenshu's cave and sent him on his journey. Everyone waved goodbye to Ji Tianxing outside the cave of Yenshu. After watching his figure disappear into the horizon, the experts returned to the cave of Yenshu. It didn't take long for the news to reach Meng Shuai's hands through some confidential channels. On the surface, the Meng Shuai and the imperial tutor did not do anything for more than a month. In fact, they had already agreed on a plan and secretly made many arrangements. It was inevitable that they would plant spies around the cave of Yenshu and infiltrate the cave of Yenshu. Perhaps, the spies and informants would not be able to find out about the secrets in the cave of Yenshu. However, Ji Tianxing was going to battle openly, and the leaders of the various forces were sending him off. This was a grand occasion. As long as the spies and informants were not blind, they would definitely find out. Soon, the Meng Shuai, who was billions of miles away, received the news that Kenshin had left the cave of Yenshu alone to rescue Nangong Ao. After looking through the transmission jade slip, Meng Shuai laughed coldly a few times in disdain and ordered the divine king powerhouses under his command to increase their speed and advance. As I expected, Kenshin is still as arrogant as before. He knew that I would set up an ambush, but he still came to rescue Nangong Ao alone. He is so arrogant that he looks down on me and the imperial tutor. That is the way to his death. Send my order to speed up and return to the domain of true martial as soon as possible. I will try to increase the power of the traps and ambushes so that Kenshin will die in the domain of true martial. It was obvious that the Meng Shuai was on the divine ship to escort Nangong Ao to the domain of true martial. After all, he had captured Nangong Ao in the He-Tien region 3 days ago and left that very night to return to the domain of true martial. He was leading many elite soldiers on 3 divine ships, so he could not speed up. Even if he sped up, it would take him 3 days to reach the domain of true martial. He estimated that Kenshin would take 7 days to reach the domain of true martial. In this way, he would have 4 days to increase the power of the traps and ambushes when he returned to the domain of true martial. As he calculated these things in his mind, the Meng Shuai sneered and muttered to himself, Kenshin, Kenshin, you were too arrogant in the past and that was why you died. Even though you have returned to your peak, you are still so arrogant. This time, you will make the same mistake and die without a burial place. Everyone thought that Kenshin was rushing to the domain of true martial after leaving the cave of Yenshu. However, Ji Tianxing's doppelganger flew for hundreds of thousands of miles after leaving the cave of Yenshu. When he saw that no one was watching or following him, he quietly turned back. After 2 hours, he quietly returned to the cave of Yenshu. This matter was still hidden from everyone. Only Nangong Buhua and Nangong Nihuang knew about it. Ji Tianxing's original body continued to drive the deity-slaying battleship to the domain of true martial. Unknowingly, 18 hours had passed. It was now midnight. In 6 hours, the deity-slaying battleship would reach the domain of true martial at dawn. However, Ji Tianxing did not continue forward. Instead, he changed his direction slightly and flew toward the east. The reason why he did not go to the domain of true martial was not because he was afraid of the traps and ambushes set by the Meng Shuai and the imperial tutor. It was because he was sure that the Meng Shuai had not returned to the domain of true martial since he was escorting Nangong Ao. 4 days ago, the Meng Shuai captured Nangong Ao. Even if he immediately left the Hetian region and returned to the domain of true martial, he would still be in the domain of true martial. He had more than 2,000 elite soldiers and 3 divine ships with him. It was impossible for him to travel quickly. Even if there were no delays, it would still take him 6 days to return to the domain of true martial. In other words, the Meng Shuai is now 2 days away from the domain of true martial. Ji Tianxing sat in the cockpit of the deity-slaying battleship and calculated silently. A map of the boundless heaven continent appeared in his mind as he began to deduce the Meng Shuai's route. The distance from the Hetian region to the domain of true martial was the shortest in a straight line. He knew clearly which regions he would pass through. Since the Meng Shuai was 2 days away from the domain of true martial, Ji Tianxing immediately deduced that the Meng Shuai should be in the center of the domain of true martial. His current location was in the northwest of the domain of true martial. After many deductions and verifications, he finally determined that if he rushed to the domain of true martial to kill the Meng Shuai, he would most likely encounter the Meng Shuai's divine ships at the northern border of the domain of true martial. Chapter 4085. The Meng Shuai and the imperial tutor spent a month amassing troops in the realm of true martial and setting up an inescapable trap. They want to use this opportunity to kill me before the rebel alliance takes action. This way, the boundless heaven continent won't fall into chaos, and they'll pay the smallest price to achieve their ultimate goal. It's a brilliant plan, but they don't know that I won't go to the realm of true martial. When the Meng Shuai is on his way back to the realm of true martial, I'll take him by surprise and rescue Nangong Ao. These thoughts flashed through Ji Tianxing's mind, and his lips curled into a playful sneer. War was never a head-on clash between military might and military might. It was more about the use of wisdom and strategy. In the center of the Gale domain, the long night passed, and dawn finally arrived. The sky had just brightened, and above a sea of white clouds, 3 divine warships flew past at lightning speed. The leading divine warship was 3,000 meters long and scarlet in color. Its design was fierce and callous, like a divine eagle spreading its wings to kill its prey. This was the Meng Shuai's flagship, a superior king-grade divine warship that could accommodate several thousand soldiers. But at this moment, there were only 800 elite soldiers on board. Behind the Meng Shuai's flagship were 2 black divine warships about 800 meters long, one on the left and one on the right. These were the warships of the 2 great generals. In terms of grade, defense, and power, they were slightly inferior to the Meng Shuai's flagship. However, in these 2 warships, there were also 800 officers and soldiers. The 2,400 soldiers on these 3 divine warships had won the battle in the Hetian region and captured the 9th elder of the Nangong clan. Naturally, they'd made a great contribution. But on their way back to the realm of true martial, the soldiers weren't too excited. They knew that the real battle hadn't begun yet. Once they returned to the realm of true martial, they still had to follow orders and carry out the mission of killing the Kenshin. That was the most important and also the most difficult task. If they could win this battle and successfully kill the Kenshin, then they would truly have made a great contribution, which was worthy of pride and celebration. Therefore, on the way back to the domain of true martial, the soldiers on the 3 divine warships all quietly circulated and regulated their breathing, conserving their energy. A small number of guards remained vigilant and alert. But in reality, they were just carrying out their mission as usual and were not worried about their safety. After all, everyone knew that Kenshin had just received the news and was on his way to the true martial domain. Even if Kenshin was the fastest, it would still take him 5 to 6 days to arrive. Their journey would be very safe and peaceful. Not only did the soldiers have such thoughts, even Grand Marshal Meng had the same thought. Along the way, the Meng Shuai had been meditating in the secret chamber of the ship and had barely shown his face. He never thought that there would be any danger along the way. His mind was filled with thoughts of how to strengthen the ambush after returning to the true martial domain. Just as the sun was about to rise, a smear of orange appeared on the horizon. The Meng Shuai's ship and 2 black warships were flying over a vast lake. Suddenly, a 5-colored divine light shot up from the lake in front of the 3 divine warships. Whoosh! The divine light was oval-shaped and about 10,000 miles wide. It instantly rose into the sky like a towering wall. This 5-colored wall of light rapidly expanded, connecting the lake on the ground and the sea of clouds in the sky, forming a massive canopy. The God King generals piloting the 3 divine warships noticed that something was wrong. They immediately sounded the alarm and steered the divine warships to the left and right. However, 5-colored divine light that blotted out the sun also appeared in the sky to the left and right. Whoosh! 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 5-colored divine light shot up from the front, back, left, and right of the 3 divine warships and gathered high in the sky. In the blink of an eye, a semicircular canopy of 10,000 miles wide sealed off the area. The 3 divine warships were trapped in the 5-colored canopy. They immediately felt a terrifying pressure descend upon them, causing them to tremble violently and descend. Even a fool would know that they had fallen into an ambush. An expert had set up a heaven and earth great array here, trapping them in a trap. Fortunately, the generals piloting the divine warships were relatively calm and carried out a series of emergency plans without panicking. First, they woke up the Meng Shuai and all the soldiers. Then, they stopped the divine warships in the sky and activated all the formations to resist the suppression of the heaven and earth formation. The 2,400 soldiers on the 3 divine warships also appeared to be well trained. After they were awakened, they finished assembling in just 10 breaths and entered a state of readiness for battle. The Meng Shuai walked out of the secret chamber and entered the main hall of the divine warship to personally command his soldiers. When his orders were passed on to the other 2 divine warships, all the soldiers had finished assembling and were ready for battle. The Meng Shuai released his divine sense to investigate the situation within 10,000 miles. He was furious. His face darkened as he thought to himself, which daring bastard dares to set up a formation here to ambush Bunshuai's warship? Damn bastard, this marshal will definitely skin you alive and pull out your tendons. However, even after his divine sense had searched the surrounding area several times, he still could not find a single person. Damn it! Cowards who hide their heads but show their tails. The Meng Shuai cursed angrily. He immediately ordered the 3 divine warships to get into formation and forcibly break through the 5-colored canopy. Soon, the 3 divine warships arranged themselves into a sword formation. With the Meng Shuai's warship in the lead, they headed straight for the 5-colored canopy in the north. Whoosh! With the Meng Shuai's order, the 3 divine warships exploded with their fastest speed and fiercest firepower toward the 5-colored canopy. Boom! Crack! With a deafening noise, the Meng Shuai's warship was the first to hit the 5-colored canopy. Dazzling fragments of divine light burst out and a destructive blast of air burst forth. Within 10,000 miles, the sea of clouds in the sky dissipated, and the lakes on the ground dried up. The endless lake water evaporated and turned into a mist that covered the sky and the sun. However, the five-colored canopy shook violently more than 10 times and cracked, but it did not shatter. On the other hand, the Meng Shuai's warship suffered the violent recoil and was sent flying backward. Fortunately, it flew sideways and did not hit the other two warships. Otherwise, it would have led to a disaster and heavy casualties. Unlike now, where only a small number of people had suffered minor injuries. Before the earth-shattering noise dissipated, the other two black warships hit the five-colored canopy one after another. Boom! Boom! With a muffled boom, the two black warships were also sent flying back, tumbling hundreds of miles away. The five-colored canopy shook violently but did not crack, let alone shatter. A moment later, the three divine warships stabilized themselves as they fell and continued to float in the sky. The defensive power of the five-colored canopy had obviously exceeded the Meng Shuai's expectations. His face grew darker as he pondered how to break this worldly array. Chapter 4086. Even at this moment, Meng Shuai still couldn't guess who set up this great formation to ambush him. As for Ji Tianxing, he did not even think about it. After all, Ji Tianxing had just left Yenshu's grotto heaven not long ago and was still on his way. How could he appear here? Just as the Meng Shuai was using his eye technique to observe the five-colored light shield, some of his subordinates spoke up. The deputy generals beside him all suggested, "Marshal Meng, let's gather all the soldiers and form a battle formation to attack together. We will definitely be able to break this formation." That's right. We used the warship to crash into the formation. In order not to damage the warship, we held back. However, if the soldiers form a battle formation, the impact will be several times stronger. The Meng Shuai also thought that this idea was feasible and was weighing the pros and cons. At this moment, a white light suddenly appeared in the sky ahead. Before anyone could react, the white light flashed across the sky and slashed the waist of the Meng Shuai's warship. Kaboom! There was a thunderous sound as the white light disappeared, but a huge gap had been cut open at the waist of the warship. The gap was 100 feet long and 10 feet wide. Sparks flew everywhere, divine light shot out, and debris spilled out. The incomparably violent force of the impact sent the warship flying, rolling and crashing dozens of miles away. The 800 soldiers in the warship were caught off guard by the sudden attack and were all dizzy from the fall. Fortunately, they were prepared for battle and managed to stabilize themselves in time when the warship was rolling and flying. Otherwise, the 800 soldiers would have been in a mess. Of course, the gap left by the white light was originally a few secret chambers. In one of the secret rooms, there were 8 guards standing guard outside the door. No matter what happened, they would not leave. However, when the white light slashed the warship, 6 of them were killed in an instant. The other 2 protectors were lucky to survive, but they were also severely injured. When the Meng Shuai released his divine sense to check the gap and connected it with the white light, he suddenly understood something. Enemy attack. The person who ambushed us has finally made his move. That white light just now was sword light. Quick, prepare for battle. The Meng Shuai reacted quickly and immediately figured out the truth. At the same time, he also guessed the purpose of the ambushers. They were probably trying to rescue the person in the secret chamber at the gap. The person imprisoned in the secret chamber was none other than Nangong Ao. The Meng Shuai frowned as various thoughts flashed through his mind. An expert is coming to rescue Nangong Ao. Who wants to rescue Nangong Ao? Kenshin? Impossible. He can't be so fast. It can't be Kenshin or Nangong Buhua or the leaders of the 8 forces. So, it is likely an expert from the ancient era. This ancient clan secretly sided with the sword god and was ordered to save Nangong Ao. In the Meng Shuai was Meng Shuai's guess. And the Meng Shuai was the most. Out of the 20 godly king experts on the flagship, 10 of them immediately stepped forward and led the 300 godly monarch experts out of the flagship. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. They flew to the gap at the waist of the flagship and surrounded it, vigilantly watching their surroundings. The remaining 10 god kings and 500 monarchs remained in the flagship. Some of them protected the Meng Shuai, while the others guarded the internal passage. The other 2 black warships that had not been ambushed also became nervous. However, the 3 divine warships were all on high alert. Their nerves were tense. The ambushers who were hiding in the dark had disappeared without a trace. They did not launch any more sneak attacks. There was a dead silence. The atmosphere was so heavy that it seemed as if the air had frozen. Even Meng Shuai couldn't detect the traces and aura of the assailants with his own divine spells. This was too strange. The Meng Shuai also felt that something was wrong. He was a true peak god king. Except for the 5 god emperors, no one should be able to get within 10,000 miles of him and evade his detection. At the thought of this, Meng Shuai's heart felt uneasy. Ji Tianxing was the one who had set up the heaven and earth formation in the middle of the lake. He had calculated that the Meng Shuai would have to pass through here, so he had set up the formation as soon as he arrived. In order to set up the most powerful formation in the shortest time possible and ensure that it could trap the Meng Shuai and his 2,000 elite soldiers, he had used 36 superior king-rank divine artifacts. He had arranged the divine artifacts around him to form the foundation of the formation. Thus, this great formation was completed in half an hour. Moreover, it could withstand the impact of 3 divine battleships without shattering or collapsing. When the 3 warships passed by, Ji Tianxing activated the formation without hesitation and sealed them here. However, he was not in a hurry to act, nor did he reveal himself. He knew full well the goal of this operation. Killing the Meng Shuai and his 2,000 elite soldiers was secondary. His top priority was to rescue Nangong Ao. Thus, he hid in the dark and searched for Nangong Ao's whereabouts. He secretly cast a secret technique to investigate the situation inside the 3 divine warships. According to his speculations, Nangong Ao was most likely imprisoned in the Meng Shuai's warship. He had guessed correctly. He did not investigate the 2 black warships. Instead, he searched for the Meng Shuai's warship and found Nangong Ao's aura. Although the secret chamber where Nangong Ao was imprisoned was protected by several layers of formations, he could not see what was going on inside. However, he saw that after the Meng Shuai had issued the order to fight, the 800 soldiers had gathered. There were still 8 high divine lords standing guard outside one of the secret chambers. Moreover, the defensive formation of that secret room was exceptionally powerful. There were several layers of it inside and outside. Ji Tianxing immediately guessed that Nangong Ao was most likely imprisoned in that secret chamber. Otherwise, the Meng Shuai would not have spent so much effort on an ordinary secret chamber. He had guessed correctly. When he slashed the Meng Shuai's warship and made a huge hole in it, the 6 guards were instantly killed. The 6 guards were killed on the spot, and a layer of the defensive formation of the secret room was also destroyed. The Meng Shuai immediately became nervous. He sent out 10 god kings and 300 divine lords to surround the hole and the secret chamber. This further confirmed Ji Tianxing's speculation. However, he was not in a hurry to show himself or rescue Nangong Ao. After all, the secret chamber was protected by 4 layers of defensive formations and 10 god kings and 300 divine lords were guarding the hole. The Meng Shuai, 10 god kings and 500 divine lords were also on high alert in the warship. Once he showed himself or attacked, the Meng Shuai would be able to detect his location and attack him. If he was surrounded by the Meng Shuai, 20 god kings and 800 divine lords, the 1,600 soldiers on the other 2 warships would do their best to kill him. No matter how powerful he was, there was no way he could withstand the combined attack of a peak god king, 40 god kings and 2,400 divine lords. Chapter 4087. Ji Tianxing was alone against 3 divine warships and 2,400 experts. He could not act rashly. He could only calmly analyze the situation and create opportunities. The Meng Shuai is already on guard. Although he isn't sure that I'm the one who ambushed him, he should have guessed that I'm going to rescue Nangong Ao. I can't save Nangong Ao yet. I have to think of a way to distract them and make the battlefield chaotic. After making up his mind, Ji Tianxing remained invisible and quietly flew toward the 2 black divine warships. It was obviously unwise to continue attacking the Meng Shuai's divine warships. After all, everyone's attention was focused on them. Instead, the 2 black divine warships became their weak points. Swish. The next moment, Ji Tianxing appeared on the side of one of the black divine warships and slashed with his sword as fast as he could. It was still a blinding white sword aura that was 10,000 feet long. It flashed across the sky like a bolt of lightning. In order to prevent the Meng Shuai from seeing through his identity, Ji Tianxing did not use his signature move or even the sword intent of heaven-piercing. The attack was powerful, but there was nothing special about it. It was probably not powerful enough to deal with the Meng Shuai, but it was enough to deal with the two black divine warship. Kaboom! Along with an earth-shattering boom, the sword beam struck the black battleship, causing countless sparks and metal fragments to fly everywhere. The black battleship that was 8,000 feet long was actually cut in half by Ji Tianxing. The divine warship was cut in two. The cut was smooth and flat. Debris and dozens of divine lords were thrown out of the cut. The violent impact threw the two halves of the divine warship into the air and sent it tumbling to the ground. Countless screams and cries rang out. Hundreds of divine lords fled the divine warships in a panic and flew in all directions. At this moment, Ji Tianxing swung his fist and sent out a fist shadow the size of a mountain. This was a simplified version of the draconic elephant divine fist. Its power was the same, but it did not have the draconic elephant divine fist. It was simple. He wanted to avoid being recognized by the Meng Shuai. Peng peng peng. The mountain-sized golden fist aura smashed into the crowd, producing a series of muffled sounds. The hundreds of Sir Gods who were fleeing in panic were instantly blasted into minced meat. Blood splattered all over the sky. With just this move, Ji Tianxing had instantly killed more than 100 Sir Gods. The other 600 Sir Gods were scared out of their wits as they ran even faster. The battlefield instantly became chaotic. There were figures everywhere, and there was no formation to speak of. The Meng Shuai and the soldiers became alert and turned their attention to the broken warship. Originally, the Meng Shuai wanted to use a secret technique to find out where Ji Tianxing was. However, Ji Tianxing's reaction was too fast. Almost at the same time, he slashed out his sword light and punched out with his fist radiance, and then quickly concealed himself. As a result, the Meng Shuai missed him again and failed to capture his aura and traces. Damn it! This coward is too despicable. The Meng Shuai was so angry that he gritted his teeth and his face turned pale. In his anger, he flew out of the warship and hovered in the sky with a saber in his hand. He had accumulated all his energy and was surrounded by a terrifying murderous aura. He looked around with sharp eyes. This time, his immortal will covered a radius of 10,000 miles and even a speck of dust could be seen. As long as Ji Tianxing attacked again, he would not miss it. He would definitely be able to lock onto Ji Tianxing's aura. However, Ji Tianxing hid at the edge of the array and stared at him from a few thousand miles away, waiting patiently. 100 seconds later, the sky calmed down again. Ji Tianxing did not attack, and the Meng Shuai was still on guard. The two halves of the battleship fell to the ground. The 600 Sir Gods who were lucky enough to survive had all escaped and gathered together, still in a state of shock. A few minutes later, the wounded were also treated. More than 2,000 soldiers clenched their weapons tightly, their nerves stretched taut to the extreme. However, Ji Tianxing was still calm and did not make a move. A quarter of an hour passed. The world was still silent. Ji Tianxing seemed to have disappeared. The Meng Shuai was slightly tired and irritated. He was even angrier. The more than 2,000 soldiers also began to look at each other in dismay and began to discuss secretly via voice transmission. Where is that coward? Why is there no movement after such a long time? Could it be that he knew that he was not strong enough and that we outnumbered him, so he secretly escaped? That's very likely. With the Meng Shuai here and more than 2,000 of us, whoever shows up will die. Who do you think would be so bold as to kill the Meng Shuai halfway? In the entire boundless heaven continent, I guess it's only Kenshin. But Kenshin has just left Yenshu's cave and is still on his way. How could he appear here? Yes. Even if Kenshin can travel thousands of miles in a second, he can't possibly get here in 2 days. Since the soldiers began to discuss secretly, they naturally let down their guard. The Meng Shuai also began to curse and insult Ji Tianxing. He wanted to provoke Ji Tianxing and force him to show up. Seeing that the time was right, Ji Tianxing quietly approached the second black warship and made his move. This time, in order to not be discovered by the Meng Shuai, he only made one move with his sword. Sword of Apocalypse. He drew on the vast power of the world and made a giant golden sword that was thousands of feet long. It only took him 1/5 of an instant to make this move. After making the move, he retracted his aura and quickly retreated to the edge of the formation. As a result, the Meng Shuai did not have the chance to lock onto his tracks and aura, let alone identify him. Kaboom! The giant divine sword that was thousands of feet long struck the black warship with the power to destroy everything. In the deafening sound, the black warship that was 8,000 feet long was swallowed by the golden sword light and shattered into pieces. Hundreds of millions of pieces of metal mixed with the flesh and blood of hundreds of Sir Gods sprinkled in the air. After destroying the divine warship, the power of the Sword of Apocalypse did not diminish. It struck the ground again. Coincidentally, the remaining half of the divine warship that fell on the ground was also struck by the sword light and shattered into pieces. Amidst the loud rumbling, a 6,000-mile-long ravine was cut open on the ground, and sand and dust were sent flying into the air. The power of this sword was actually so terrifying. Not only did it destroy a warship, but it also killed more than 700 Sir Gods and dozens of King of Gods. It also turned the battlefield into ruins. The few divine kings and more than 40 divine lords who were lucky enough to survive were covered in blood. They were in an extremely wretched state. They passed through the debris weakly and desperately ran toward the Meng Shuai and the others. Meng Shuai and more than 30 divine kings and more than 1,000 divine lords revealed a look of shock. They were both shocked and furious. They could not imagine how powerful the ambusher was to be able to use such a powerful divine power. Even the Meng Shuai could not do it. Therefore, he felt even more uneasy. An incredulous thought appeared in his mind. Chapter 4088. Kenshin. It's you. It must be you. Am I right? The furious and shocked Meng Shuai couldn't help but roar at the empty sky. However, he also felt that this idea was ridiculous and completely unbelievable. However, he couldn't think of anyone other than Kenshin who could have such terrifying means. The soldiers heard Meng Shuai's roar in disbelief. Many of them had strange expressions on their faces. After all, it was too absurd and unbelievable. However, Ji Tianxing had hidden himself and never showed up. Not even his shadow could be seen. No one could verify whether the Meng Shuai was telling the truth or not. The two black warships had been destroyed, leaving only the Meng Shuai's warship in the sky. Of the 2,400 soldiers, there were only about 1,500 left. Many of them were seriously injured, and they looked to be in a very sorry state. Earlier, they were confident that victory was within their grasp. Now, they were panicking. If they could see their opponent, even if it was really Kenshin, they wouldn't be so panicked. However, the fear of the unknown was the most terrifying. Up until now, the Meng Shuai had lost more than 800 soldiers. They didn't even know who their opponent was. Wasn't that terrifying enough? Of course, what happened earlier couldn't be considered a battle. The enemy had only launched a sneak attack. The Meng Shuai and his soldiers couldn't fight back at all. This was too depressing. However, no matter how panicked and aggrieved they couldn't run away. Moreover, they were all sealed by the 5-colored light shield. They couldn't escape. The Meng Shuai was still present and hadn't made a move. No one dared to run away. Thus, the two sides were in a stalemate. The world returned to silence. Ji Tianxing seemed to have disappeared again. The atmosphere became even heavier. Everyone's hearts were heavy. Half an hour later, Meng Shuai and the soldiers under his command were once again impatient and unable to maintain their composure. However, they had learned their lesson this time. Everyone knew that the ambusher was still hiding in the dark and hadn't left. After careful consideration, the Meng Shuai decided to change its strategy. If this continued, the first to collapse would definitely be the soldiers under his command. After all, the Heaven and Earth Great Formation within a radius of 10,000 miles was still operating, constantly exerting pressure. The divine power of more than 1,500 soldiers was being drained at every moment. If the stalemate continued for 2 or 3 days, these soldiers would have exhausted all their strength and would not have any fighting strength left. Meng Shuai calculated in his mind. The previous 3 attacks were to create chaos and divert Ben Shuai's attention. In fact, his real goal was to rescue Nangong Ao. As long as Ben Shuai kept a close eye on Nangong Ao, there was nothing he could do. Moreover, even if he was a Kenshin, he wouldn't dare face Ben Shuai and his 1,000 soldiers head-on. He's been hiding in the dark all this time. Ben Shuai can't catch him, so he can only break the formation first. With this in mind, the Meng Shuai made up his mind and decisively issued an order. Except for the 4 generals piloting the warship, everyone else is to leave the warship and protect it. Especially near the gap. Send more people to keep an eye on the hostage. Thus, all the soldiers left the warship and guarded it with their weapons. Another 5 god kings led 200 monarchs to reinforce the gap, surrounding it so tightly that not even a drop of water could trickle through. The secret room where Nangong Ao was imprisoned became the target of everyone's vigilance. Next, the Meng Shuai ordered the 4 generals piloting the warship to fly slowly. The Meng Shuai personally took the lead and escorted the warship to the 5-colored dome in the north with over 1,000 soldiers. In this way, more than 500 soldiers guarded the gap in the warship while over 1,000 soldiers protected the warship. The Meng Shuai personally used his divine arts to observe the structure and veins of the ceiling formation and think of a way to break it. Using a fence as defense was indeed a good strategy. If Ji Tianxing continued to be in a stalemate, the Meng Shuai would be able to break the formation and lead the soldiers to escape. If Ji Tianxing lost his cool and attacked the warship, he would be besieged by over 1,000 soldiers. In short, the Meng Shuai had the upper hand again. However, a problem soon arose. 15 minutes later, the Meng Shuai roughly saw the structure and veins of the formation. He had thought it was just a high-grade king-level divine formation. But in fact, it was a supreme-grade king-level divine formation. Even if Ben Shuai were to personally set up a supreme-grade divine formation, it would take at least 10 days to half a month. Could it be that the ambushers knew that Ben Shuai would pass by here half a month ago? That's ridiculous. The Meng Shuai's expression was ugly. His brows were tightly knitted together, unable to relax. Through this supreme-grade king-level divine formation, he realized how terrifying his opponent was. He increasingly suspected that the ambushers hiding in the dark were Kenshin. No matter how ridiculous or unbelievable the answer was, he had to accept it. However, he put aside the question of who the ambushers were for now. His top priority was to find a way to break the formation as soon as possible. 360 million meridians, 36 million nodes, and at least 360 array bases. Such a complex and profound formation, Ben Shuai would have to deduce tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of times to find a way to break it. As he focused on observing the formation, the Meng Shuai felt a headache and a sense of helplessness. If he had seen this array before, or if he had deciphered this array before, then it would be fine. At the very least, he would be able to quickly determine the direction to break the formation and choose the correct one from thousands of methods. However, this formation was unfamiliar. He had never come into contact with it before. He could not find a way to break the formation, so he could only deduce and calculate over and over again. He was a peak divine king with an extremely powerful sea of consciousness. He could deduce 3 to 5 times in 15 minutes. However, if he had to deduce tens of millions of times, it would take him years. Unless he was extremely lucky, he would not be able to find the correct way to break the formation after a few hundred tries. Or, if he was so lucky, he would be able to find the correct solution after 2 or 3 tries. Ji Tianxing hid in the dark and observed. He was troubled by the fact that the Meng Shuai was so focused on studying the formation and more than 1,000 soldiers were on high alert. If he tried to stop the Meng Shuai, he would be besieged by the soldiers. However, if he didn't stop them, if Meng Shuai managed to break the formation, these people would be able to escape. Fortunately, he knew that the Meng Shuai's formation skills were ordinary, so he was confident in the great formation of heaven and earth. The Meng Shuai would not be able to break the formation for at least 2 or 3 days. However, he had a misgivings. He was worried that the Meng Shuai would threaten him with Nangong Ao's life and force him to open the formation. Given the Meng Shuai's temperament, this was very likely. Therefore, Ji Tianxing could not wait any longer. He had to act. Sword rain. While the Meng Shuai was not paying attention, he suddenly erupted with all his strength and used his ultimate killing move. In an instant, tens of thousands of silver lights lit up the sky and fell like a meteor shower. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. These were 90,000 giant swords made of stars. They descended from the sky with the power to destroy everything. Chapter 4089. The Meng Shuai's attention was focused on the array. More than 1,000 soldiers were on high alert as they stared at the gap in the battleship and the sky around the battleship. However, they didn't expect that Ji Tianxing's next attack wasn't a sword light, but a fist light. Instead, it was tens of thousands of giant swords that fell from the sky. Before the sword light arrived, the destructive power had already descended and enveloped everyone. Countless soldiers were filled with fear as they subconsciously looked up at the sky. Everyone's scalp tingled when they saw the densely packed starry swords. Feeling the terrifying power of the starry swords, everyone was filled with fear and horror. They almost turned around and fled. Even the Meng Shuai, who was focused on studying the array, was shocked by the power of tens of thousands of starry swords and subconsciously looked up at the sky. At this critical moment, Ji Tianxing did not hesitate and teleported to the gap in the battleship. There were more than a dozen god kings and more than 200 Sir gods blocking his way. He wanted to pass through the gap in the battleship and enter the battleship to rescue Nangong Ao. He had to break through their blockade. Therefore, he made a prompt decision and brandished his divine sword, slashing out 9 golden sword lights towards the crowd in front of him. The dozen god kings and more than 200 Sir gods were looking up at the starry swords in the sky. They were filled with fear and panic. They were unprepared. Ji Tianxing did not hide his tracks and aura and directly launched his attack. After all, success or failure depended on this move. As long as he could successfully enter the battleship and rescue Nangong Ao, Ji Tianxing was not afraid of exposing his identity and tracks. Bang bang bang. Before the god kings and Sir gods could react, they were enveloped by the golden sword lights. Following a series of dull explosions, the golden lights flashed in the crowd and blood and flesh splattered everywhere. Not only were there dozens of Sir gods, but there were also 7 middle-level god kings and a 7th-level high-level god king. They were all killed by the golden sword lights. When Ji Tianxing unleashed his sword Dao divine ability with all his might, even a 7th stage realm high-level god king would be instantly killed. However, not only were the middle-level god kings and Sir gods killed physically, their godheads were also shattered. That high-level god king's body was destroyed, and his godhead was severely damaged, but he survived. Ji Tianxing tore a hole in the defensive line formed by everyone, and without hesitation, he went through the hole and entered the warship. At this moment, the others reacted. The Meng Shuai also let out a roar and rushed over murderously. He finally found Ji Tianxing's tracks and locked onto the aura of Ji Tianxing's soul. When he confirmed that the ambusher was Kenshin, his heart was filled with shock and disbelief. This caused him to be stunned for a moment. But in that instant, the ending was changed. Rumble. In the next moment, 90,000 star swords descended like dense raindrops, covering a radius of 10,000 miles. Everyone and the Meng Shuai's warships were hit by countless starry swords. The Meng Shuai was the strongest among them. The starry swords could not hurt him, but they were able to trap him. He could not escape, so he could only use his defensive divine powers to block the attacks of the swords. More than 1,000 soldiers suffered. Under the bombardment of the swords, blood and flesh splattered everywhere, and they screamed in agony. The heaven and earth formation within a radius of 10,000 miles had completely turned into a silver ocean, filled with 90,000 star swords. It was chaos. Even though everyone knew that Ji Tianxing had rushed into the warship and was crazily hacking at the defensive array of the secret chamber, no one could stop him. After all, the starry swords were too powerful. Even the Meng Shuai could not escape, let alone the others. Bang! 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 Inside the warship, Ji Tianxing swung his divine hammer as fast as lightning and smashed the door of the secret chamber. Not far from his feet, 2 high-level divine lords had already been reduced to a pile of flesh and blood. He had killed the 2 guards as soon as he entered the warship. Then, in order to save time and break the defense of the secret chamber as soon as possible, he did not use the sword of burial of heaven. Instead, he took out the divine hammer. The supreme-grade king-level divine artifact was indeed extraordinary. Boom, boom, boom. The superior king-level divine array that sealed the secret chamber was soon shattered. Crack, kaboom. Along with the sound of shattering, layer after layer of defensive formations were smashed into pieces, bursting into balls of divine light fragments. If Ji Tianxing hadn't forcefully destroyed the array formations, he would have needed a quarter of an hour to break them, no matter how high his attainments in the array Dao were. However, he used the divine hammer to attack with all his might. In just 3 breaths, he had destroyed all the layers of array formations. Finally, he smashed the door of the secret chamber with the last blow. The door, made of God King level metal, was dented and fell to the ground with a loud clang. Swish! Ji Tianxing stepped through the door as fast as lightning and rushed into the secret room. The secret chamber was 50 feet wide and dark. It was cold and bone-chilling. The floor was engraved with array patterns, and they were glowing with dark divine light. A bronze obelisk stood in the middle of the floor. A deity clan man in ragged clothes and covered in blood was chained to the obelisk. The chains were all specially made king-level divine artifacts. They pierced through the man's shoulder blades and ribs, and locked his wrists and ankles. Not only did the chains bind his body, but they also restricted his divine power. The array on the floor was still operating, and it also sealed his divine power. His hair was disheveled, and he was covered in wounds and blood. It was obvious that he had been tortured. Even though there was such a big commotion outside, and Ji Tianxing rushed into the secret chamber, he still kept his head down and did not react. Ji Tianxing reached out and brushed away the man's blood-stained hair. Only then did he see the almost deformed face covered in blood. It was Nangong Ao. Apparently, Nangong Ao was half dead after being tortured. He was in a coma. Ji Tianxing's heart clenched as he watched. Anger surged in his chest, and his killing intent rose. Nangong Ao, wake up. He slapped Nangong Ao's cheeks and tried to wake him up. Unfortunately, Nangong Ao's injuries were too severe. He could not wake up, and his breathing was very weak. Ji Tianxing did not dare to waste any time. He quickly swung the divine hammer and destroyed the array on the floor. Then, he used the divine hammer to break the chains that bound Nangong Ao. Nangong Ao was finally saved, but he could not stand up. He fell straight to the ground. Ji Tianxing did not hesitate to catch him and put him into the distorted time and space of Zhoutian Tenju Tower. He handed him over to Yun Yarrow, Chao Qingyu, and the others for treatment. At this point, he had successfully saved Nangong Ao. Even if his identity was exposed, and he had to face more than 1,000 experts alone, he was not afraid. He had no more worries. When he left the battleship and returned to the sky with the divine hammer in his left hand and the sword of burial of heaven in his right hand, his body was already burning with blood flames. Those flames were condensed from anger and killing intent. They soared into the sky and were terrifying. At this time, the 90,000 starry giant swords gradually dissipated. Outside the shattered battleship, everything within a radius of 10,000 miles had become scorched ruins. It was a tragic scene. Chapter 4090. The 90,000 star swords wreaked havoc in the formation for 5 breaths of time. In just 5 breaths, the world within 10,000 miles was shattered and filled with blood and gore. When the stellar swords rained down, more than 800 divine lords and 10 godly kings were killed in the first wave. Their bodies were reduced to smithereens, and their godheads were shattered as well. Meng Shuai and many godly kings defended themselves with their arts and destroyed a few thousand stellar swords. But their efforts were futile. The remaining more than 80,000 starry swords shuttled back and forth in the sky, slaughtering everything in their way. As a result, over 500 divine lord experts and over a dozen divine king experts died tragically under the mincing of the 10,000 huge swords. Not even their corpses remained. Even Meng Shuai's warship was destroyed after more than 20,000 attacks. Along with a series of cracking noises, the 1,000-foot-long battleship was torn apart, turning into pieces that blotted out the sky and covered the earth, scattering in the ruins. At this moment, all the stellar swords were gone. The sky became empty. Only Ji Tianxing, Meng Shuai, the 7 wounded and blood-stained god kings, and over 20 god monarchs who were lucky enough to survive were left. Of course, the survival of the 20 divine lords had nothing to do with their strength. It was pure luck. But their injuries were so severe that they could barely participate in the battle. The two sides faced off in the sky, staring at each other in silence. Killing intent filled the air. At this moment, Ji Tianxing no longer concealed his tracks and aura. This was the first time Meng Shuai and the others had seen him clearly since the battle began. After a while, it was Meng Shuai who spoke first. Kenshin. I didn't expect it to be you. Meng Shuai had participated in the battle where Kenshin had fallen. He had also attacked Kenshin with the Azura God Emperor. Therefore, he would never forget Kenshin's appearance and divine soul aura. At this time, Ji Tianxing's divine soul aura was the same as before, and his appearance was also 90% similar. Meng Shuai had mixed feelings when he said this. He was shocked, angry, and a little scared. After all, the Kenshin's reputation was too great. Even after 1,000 years, it still hadn't weakened. Ji Tianxing stared at the Meng Shuai with bloodshot eyes and said with a murderous look, "Who else can kill you bastards other than me? Who else could lead the people of the world to destroy Azura's dark reign? Meng Shuai, I haven't seen you in 1,000 years. You've become a peak divine king, and your courage has grown. Azura isn't in the god realm, yet you're still dreaming of killing me. What a joke." Meng Shuai was so humiliated that he gnashed his teeth and roared, "Long Tian, no matter how great your fame is, you're also merely a peak divine king. Bun Shuai and the imperial tutor are both peak divine kings, and they control the entire boundless heaven continent. Why can't they kill you? No matter how strong you are, no matter how confident you are, you still have to rely on schemes and tricks. Do you dare to fight Bun Shuai's 2,000 soldiers head-on and fight to the death?" Ji Tianxing sneered disdainfully, "Schemes and tricks are your and the imperial tutor's forte. If you weren't so despicable, why would I be here?" Meng Shuai couldn't refute him, so he changed the topic and asked with confusion, "I still don't understand. How could you be here?" Of course, he wouldn't ask how Kenshin could arrive here in just 2 days after leaving Yenshu's cave. Now, he could vaguely guess the answer. Ji Tianxing said expressionlessly, "The Kenshin that just departed from Yenshu's cave was actually my doppelganger. It was just an act to numb you. I knew it." This answer confirmed Meng Shuai's conjecture, and he suddenly realized. Just as he had guessed, the real Kenshin had departed long ago. Kenshin guessed that he had planted spies in Yenshu's cave, and purposely left a doppelganger to numb him. Brilliant. I have to say, your schemes are better than Bun Shuai's. Meng Shuai admired him from the bottom of his heart. At the same time, he realized that Kenshin was different from before. Kenshin was arrogant and confident. Although he was strong, he had obvious weaknesses. Kenshin in front of him was, of course, more difficult to deal with. But Bun Shuai still can't believe it. It's only been a few days since Bun Shuai captured Nangong Ao. How could you get here from Yenshu's cave in 5 days? Moreover, you calculated the route and time Bun Shuai would return to the domain of true martial and set up a formation here in advance. Even though Meng Shuai knew the answer, he still found it hard to believe. In his opinion, Ji Tianxing's speed was already terrifying for him to be able to get here. To be able to calculate his route back to the domain of true martial meant that Ji Tianxing was shrewd enough, and his deduction ability was superb. However, to set up a king-level formation here in advance was too illogical. Even if you're the best formation master, it would still take you 5 to 6 days to set up such a formation. Seeing Meng Shuai's confused and shocked expression, Ji Tianxing sneered, "It's because I can do things that ordinary people can't believe, and create miracles time and time again, that I'm worthy of the name Kenshin. Otherwise, how do you think I can command the heroes and conquer the vast heaven continent?" He did not waste his breath explaining to Meng Shuai. In his eyes, Meng Shuai was already a dead man. When Meng Shuai heard his words, he felt that it was very reasonable. He frowned and pondered. Ji Tianxing did not waste any more time. He raised the divine hammer and the sword of burial of heaven with both hands, pointed at Meng Shuai and the others, and said, Didn't you just say that you want to fight to the death with me? As you wish, let's fight to the death. Let me see if you've made any progress in the past 1,000 years. As soon as he finished speaking, his body emitted a golden light, and an earth-shattering power erupted. He waved the sword of burial of heaven with his right hand, and slashed out 8 sacred sword rays toward the god kings and god emperors. He waved the divine hammer with his left hand, and used all of his power to smash at Meng Shuai. In an instant, a fierce wind blew, and dust and sand swirled. Terrifying murderous intent filled the area for thousands of miles. The 7 injured god kings and more than 20 god emperors were intimidated by his murderous intent and power, and they all retreated. Meng Shuai could not retreat. He could only grit his teeth and fight back with the divine saber in both hands. Collapse of 1,000 mountains. Meng Shuai roared. He held the divine saber with both hands and slashed out 18 sword rays. The 7 god kings and more than 20 god emperors saw that it was useless to retreat, and they were about to be swallowed by the sword rays, so they all counterattacked. They had a strong desire to survive, so they used their trump cards to block the sword rays at all costs. In the next moment, the sky full of divine light and shadows collided violently in the sky, causing an earth-shattering explosion. Bang! 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 Rumble! Amidst the loud noise, blood splattered everywhere. Pieces of flesh and blood splattered everywhere. Miserable cries rang out one after another. It was extremely miserable. More than 20 injured Sir Gods were smashed to smithereens on the spot. None of them survived. Even out of the 7 god kings, 4 of them were slain. Chapter 4091. In the blink of an eye, another 4 godly kings and more than 20 godly emperors were slain by Ji Tianxing. Of the Meng Shuai's soldiers, only 3 godly kings were left. They were covered in blood and looked miserable. In less than an hour, out of the 2,400 soldiers, only 3 god kings remained. No one could imagine what had happened during this time. Even the Meng Shuai, who had seen the entire process with his own eyes, found it hard to believe. Ji Tianxing had single-handedly killed nearly 2,400 soldiers. This was too preposterous and too terrifying. When Ji Tianxing killed the 20 godly emperors and 4 godly kings, the Meng Shuai had thought of stopping him. Unfortunately, Ji Tianxing's full-powered hammer restrained him. He dared not be careless and could only use all his strength to defend himself. Only then did he barely manage to block the hammer's bombardment. Even so, he was sent flying 10 miles away. He had to gasp for breath for a while before he could calm his chaotic divine power. As for protecting the godly kings and godly kings under his command, he was powerless. At this point, the Meng Shuai was keenly aware of Ji Tianxing's terrifying strength. He was already terrified. He finally understood where Kenshin's courage came from to command the heroes and rise up against the Azura God Emperor. With Kenshin's terrifying strength, no one could do anything to him unless the 5 God Emperors came in person. Even though the Meng Shuai was now a peak godly king, he could only look up to Kenshin. He was no match for him. This was because he knew that there was a huge gap between peak godly kings. Die. Ji Tianxing was not like the Meng Shuai, who would have such thoughts in the face of death. He locked onto the Meng Shuai's aura and swung his hammer again. He also sent out 3 beams of sword light at the 3 godly kings. The 3 godly kings were all Meng Shuai's trusted generals. Normally, they were all powerhouses who could move unhindered and command the wind and the clouds. At this moment, they were already heavily injured. Their bodies were covered in blood, and they were in a very sorry state. When the 3 destructive sword lights came, they didn't dare to cast any spells to block them. They could only run for their lives. They had wanted to teleport away, but the area within a radius of 10,000 miles had been sealed off by the array. The space had also been confined, making it impossible for them to teleport. Helpless, they could only retreat and fly away. However, their speed was not fast enough, and they were quickly caught up by the 3 sword lights. Peng peng peng. Another series of muffled sounds rang out as the 3 god kings were struck by the sword light. Blood splattered everywhere. Their divine bodies were destroyed, turning into countless pieces of flesh and blood that scattered from the sky. 3 divine deities flew out, burning with divine flames. They erupted with the fastest speed, fleeing in all directions. Their divine bodies were destroyed, but they were lucky enough to survive. However, his godhead had also been severely damaged, and cracks had appeared on it. Even though the area within a radius of 10,000 miles had been sealed off and they had nowhere to run, they could only swim around the periphery of the Great Array. However, their strong desire to survive drove them to fly away quickly. They didn't dare to stop. Ji Tianxing didn't waste any time chasing after the three divine deities. He had just sent the Meng Shuai flying with his hammer. At this moment, the Meng Shuai had retreated 100 miles away. He was panting violently and raised his hand to wipe the blood from the corner of his mouth. Ji Tianxing took advantage of the situation to chase after the Meng Shuai. He teleported to the front of the Meng Shuai and wielded the divine hammer and the sword of burial of heaven at the same time. The mountain-like thunderbolts and the earth-shattering golden sword lights drowned out the Meng Shuai's figure. The Meng Shuai was terrified. He knew that he couldn't dodge, so he could only hold his treasured sword with both hands and block with all his might. Kaboom! In the earth-shattering noise, the three golden sword lights hit him hard, and golden fragments burst into the sky. The three sword lights all collapsed, and a destructive shockwave burst out. However, the Meng Shuai was also knocked away, and the treasured sword in his hand was thrown away. Then, a lightning ball the size of a mountain fell from the top of his head with an incomparably violent divine power. Without his weapon and his divine power, the Meng Shuai had no time to dodge the attack. At this critical moment, he roared angrily. He ignored the backlash of his divine power and used all his strength to form a protective shield. Swoosh! The moment the thunderbolts hit him, his body was covered by a layer of oval-shaped colorful shield. It protected him like an eggshell. The shield wasn't very big, only about 3 meters tall. However, the Meng Shuai unleashed his full potential and released his most powerful divine power to form such a small shield. Its defensive power was also increased by several times. Kaboom! Unfortunately, no matter how strong his shield was, it couldn't withstand the thunderbolts. In the deafening noise, his shield was smashed into pieces, and he was swallowed by the thunderbolts. He fell from the sky and smashed into the ruins with a thud. The scorched earth had been smashed into a deep pit with a radius of hundreds of meters. Dust flew up into the air. When the Meng Shuai got up from the pit, his body was charred black and smoking. He was unrecognizable. His crown had been shattered, and his hair was fluffy like a bird's nest. He looked terrible. Moreover, his internal and external injuries were very serious. His divine power was completely disordered, and his consciousness was a little blurry. After being severely injured, his combat power had decreased by more than half. He quickly took out a few divine elixirs and tried to heal himself. However, Ji Tianxing didn't give him a chance to breathe. He picked up the divine hammer and the sword of burial of heaven again and charged at him fiercely. Seeing the divine hammer shooting out nearly 100 thunderbolts and dozens of sword lights, the Meng Shuai was terrified. Stop! Kenshin, don't kill Bun Shuai. The Meng Shuai knew he couldn't resist. If he was hit by the thunderbolts and sword lights, even if he didn't die, his divine body would be destroyed. Therefore, he roared at the top of his lungs, trying to negotiate with Ji Tianxing. If you kill Bun Shuai, the entire boundless heaven continent will fight you to the death. Don't even think about knowing our plan. After thinking about it, he didn't seem to have anything to threaten Ji Tianxing with. He could only come up with these two reasons. However, Ji Tianxing turned a deaf ear to his words. The thunderbolts and sword lights didn't slow down at all. They immediately engulfed the Meng Shuai's figure. The moment before the Meng Shuai's body was destroyed, he heard Ji Tianxing's reply. If I kill you, I will still know everything. That's right. After killing the Meng Shuai, Ji Tianxing could refine his quintessence fragments and extract his divine soul memories. In this way, he could even avoid torture and negotiation. He could get all the information he wanted. Meng Shuai immediately reacted and also thought of this point. But it was too late. Bang! 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 Hundreds of thunderbolts and dozens of sword lights exploded with destructive power, cutting the Meng Shuai into pieces on the spot. In an earth-shattering explosion, flesh and blood splattered, and divine light splashed in all directions. The Meng Shuai didn't even have time to scream before he was reduced to ashes. Even his quintessence was severely damaged, and several cracks appeared on it. He barely managed to stay awake. His quintessence burned with flames as he ran north as fast as he could. Chapter 4092. However, the array was still in place. Meng Shuai's godhead could not escape the seal of the array, just like the three superior god kings. However, he could not stay in the array. He had to escape even if it meant risking his life. Whoosh! Meng Shuai's walnut-sized diamond-shaped godhead blazed with 5 colored flames as it slammed into the 5-colored light wall in the north like a shooting star. As long as he could break through the light wall, he would have a chance to survive even if he was on his last breath. The other 3 god kings' godheads had been circling the edge of the array, full of fear. When they saw Meng Shuai leading the charge, they were overjoyed. They hurriedly followed Meng Shuai to the north. If they did not fight, they would die here anyway. Rather than that, they might as well take a gamble with Meng Shuai. If Meng Shuai could break through the 5-colored light wall, they would be saved. If even Meng Shuai could not break through, they would have nothing to say but accept their fate. Boom! In the next moment, Meng Shuai's godhead, which was as fast as a shooting star, crashed into the 5-colored light wall with a loud bang. The 5-colored light barrier within a radius of thousands of kilometers shook violently from the impact, creating layers of ripples in the air. Divine light and countless fragments of light burst out from the point of impact. Meng Shuai's all-out attack was indeed powerful. A few cracks appeared on the 5-colored light wall, and a series of cracking noises could be heard from it. Unfortunately, there were only cracks on the wall of light and it didn't shatter. And the incomparably powerful rebounding force sent Meng Shuai flying out backward. 2 more cracks appeared on his godhead, his injuries worsened, and his consciousness blurred. When the 3 god kings behind him saw that the situation was bad, they could not stop even if they wanted to. At this critical moment, they could only force themselves to change direction and scatter to the sides, brushing against the 5-colored light wall. They had failed this time. This also indicated that they would die without a doubt. Swoosh! Ji Tianxing arrived soon after. He slashed at Meng Shuai's godhead with his sword. Meng Shuai was at the end of his tether. He was barely conscious and could not fight. He didn't even have the chance to dodge as he was struck by those sword lights. Kaboom! There was an earth-shattering explosion. Meng Shuai's godhead shattered into a dozen pieces and scattered in the sky. A peak god king, the right-hand man of the Azura god emperor, and the second most powerful person on the boundless heaven continent, had fallen. When the other 3 god kings saw this scene, they were dumbfounded. Their minds went blank. For hundreds of years, Meng Shuai had been a lofty, powerful, and wise leader and overlord in their hearts. They regarded Meng Shuai as their idol, their pillar, and their pillar of support. They had never thought that there would be a day when Meng Shuai would die so tragically. They could not believe it, and they were unwilling to accept it. After all, Meng Shuai had been killed by Ji Tianxing. There was no way they could escape from this formation. They were doomed. Swoosh! Ji Tianxing waved his hand and grabbed Meng Shuai's godhead fragment, and he put it away. Then, he carried the divine hammer and the sword of burial of heaven and flew toward the godheads of the 3 god kings. The 3 god kings finally came to their senses. They were scared out of their wits and fled desperately. Unfortunately, their speed was nothing compared to Ji Tianxing's. Ji Tianxing teleported and caught up with one of the god king's godheads. He raised his sword and cut it into pieces. He waved his hand and collected the scattered godhead fragments. Then, he teleported 8,000 miles and appeared in another direction. He caught up with another god king. Crack! Another slash and the god king's godhead was also cut into pieces. The 3rd god king's godhead fragment did not escape the fate and was killed 3 breaths later. At this point, the battlefield finally quieted down. Ji Tianxing was the only one left. The 2,400 elite soldiers, including Meng Shuai, had all been killed by Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing's operation this time had come to a successful conclusion. He was not in a hurry to leave. He put away the divine hammer and the sword of burial of heaven and began to clean up the battlefield. The area within 10,000 miles had been reduced to ruins. There were pits and ravines everywhere. The wreckage of the 3 divine warships, the bones of more than 2,000 soldiers, and the broken armor and weapons were scattered in the ruins. Of course, there were also their space rings and godhead fragments. Ji Tianxing only wanted to clean up the battlefield and count the spoils. He first collected more than 50 God King godhead fragments, then he collected more than 2,000 spatial rings. After doing all this in an hour, he waved his hand and struck the ground. Suddenly, the ruins within 10,000 miles surged with huge waves and completely reversed. All the wreckage, fragments, and traces were buried by the soil. The ground was also restored to its original level. Ji Tianxing then cast a spell to remove the formation and retrieve the 36 divine weapons that were scattered around. Whoosh! Whoosh whoosh whoosh! One by one, the divine weapons flew out from the bottom of the lake. They flew across the sky and returned to Ji Tianxing's hands. When the 36 divine weapons were all retrieved, the 5-colored light shield within 10,000 miles dissipated. Hualala, the emerald lake water that was blocked outside by the 5-colored light shield suddenly surged and quickly filled up the empty space within 10,000 miles. Not long after, this place was submerged by the lake. When the lake returned to its calm state, all traces were covered as if nothing had happened. At this time, Ji Tianxing had already stepped on the road back to Yenshu's grotto heaven. He was still driving the deity-slaying warship, flying high in the sky at lightning speed. Of course, this time he was not in a hurry to save people, so he did not go all out. This could save a lot of cultivation resources. Even if the deity-slaying warship was sailing at its normal speed, it was still 3 times faster than a peak divine king. In the cockpit of the warship, a few formations were operating normally. Ji Tianxing did not have time to check the spoils of war. He was worried about Nangong Ao's injuries. He took out the Jiutianzhu Tower and entered the distorted space-time. Swoosh! After a while, when he returned to the bottom of the Shuian sacred tree, he saw Yun Yarrow, Ji Ku, Chao Qingyu, Lan and the others gathered together to discuss something. He quickly walked over and saw everyone surrounding a cold jade bed. Nangong Ao, who was unconscious, was lying quietly on the bed. Previously, Nangong Ao's hair was disheveled and his body was covered in blood. He looked very miserable. At this moment, he was still covered in wounds. However, the blood and disheveled hair on his body had been cleaned up. Ji Tianxing could see that everyone was very attentive to Nangong Ao. They did not hesitate to use their divine power to clean up his blood. Tianxing, you're back? Brother Tianxing, did you defeat the Meng Shuai? At this moment, everyone saw Ji Tianxing return. They raised their heads and looked at him with concern. Although they did not show up, they did not help Ji Tianxing in the battle. However, they knew that Ji Tianxing's mission was dangerous and difficult. They were worried for him. Now that they saw him return safely without any injuries, everyone was completely relieved. Chapter 4093. Ji Tianxing used his divine sense to check on Nangong Ao's condition and asked everyone what had happened. After he handed Nangong Ao over to everyone, they ended their cultivation and did their best to treat Nangong Ao. Yun Yarrow, Ji Ku, Chao Qingyu, and the others took turns to use divine techniques to help Nangong Ao control his injuries and replenish his divine power. Chao Qingyu was more attentive and even used his divine power to clean Nangong Ao's long hair and blood. Now, Nangong Ao's injuries were basically stable and his life was no longer in danger. However, his injuries were too severe and his spirit was too weak. He would probably sleep for another 10 days to half a month before he woke up. In addition, everyone also gave Nangong Ao a few divine pills to heal his injuries. After the effects of the divine pills were released, Nangong Ao's injuries would heal faster. After knowing this, Ji Tianxing was relieved and said to everyone, "Everyone, thank you for your hard work. Nangong Ao is usually very active. This is the first time I've seen him so quiet and embarrassed. As for Meng Shuai and his soldiers, don't worry, I've killed them all." Hearing this, everyone was shocked at first and then burst into cheers. Everyone was in disbelief. Really? Meng Shuai was a peak supreme god. You killed him so quickly? Didn't the intelligence say that Meng Shuai had more than 2,000 soldiers under his command? Most of them were supreme gods and there were more than 50 supreme gods. Master's ambush strategy this time was too successful. It could be said to be perfect. Ha ha ha. Under the Shura God Emperor's command, there were two peak supreme gods guarding the boundless heaven continent. One was the imperial tutor and the other was the Meng Shuai. I'm afraid no one would have thought that Meng Shuai would be killed before the real battle even began. Yes. This is what it means to be victorious from the get-go. He killed one of the enemy's leaders in the first clash. The imperial preceptor is definitely going to be mad. We have to spread the news as soon as possible and let those ancient clans and forces who are still watching see how powerful our master is. Everyone was talking excitedly. Even Bai Long came to join in the fun. Everyone knew that this news was too exciting. Once it was spread, the entire boundless heaven continent would be shocked. The morale of the Shura God Emperor's soldiers would be dealt a fatal blow. The morale of the rebel alliance under Ji Tianxing's command would be boosted and their confidence increased. However, Ji Tianxing waved his hand to stop everyone. Don't worry, the battle has just finished. The whole thing. After all, we have to go through with our act. At the very least, we have to wait until I return to Yenshu's cave before we release this news. Everyone thought Chen made sense. What the world knew was that the God of Swords had just left the cave of Yenshu not long ago and was on his way to the Zhenwu region. If the news of Meng Shuai's death was released now, no one would believe it. At the very least, everyone knew that the Sword God had used his clone to deceive everyone, including the 8 forces of the Anti-Rebels Alliance. Even if Ji Tianxing explained, the 8 forces would not take it to heart. However, no one knew what kind of rumors would spread. In short, this kind of thing would become an unstable factor and be used to sow discord between the rebel alliance. Alright, you guys put in some effort and take good care of Nangong Ao. Bai Long, help me pilot the Deity Slayer warship. Ji Tianxing planned to check the spoils of war in the distorted spacetime while he was on his way. However, the Deity Slayer warship needed someone to take care of it. Otherwise, it would be bad if it deviated or something happened. Bai Long gladly agreed and quickly followed Ji Tianxing out of the distorted spacetime and appeared in the cockpit of the warship. In the high-end and exquisite cockpit, the layout was simple and elegant. There were a total of more than 60 divine formations. However, only 8 of them were used to control the warship. Ji Tianxing spent a quarter of an hour to teach Bai Long how to pilot it. Bai Long was very smart. He learned it after just one lesson. Then, he happily piloted the warship and rushed back to the Grotto Heaven according to the planned route. Ji Tianxing returned to the distorted spacetime and began to check the spoils of war. One day later, Ji Tianxing finished checking the spoils of war. Meng Shuai's shards of divinity and 57 deity kings' shards were sorted out by him. He had also gone through the interspatial rings of the 58 powerhouses. After a rough estimation, there were more than 30 trillion worth of cultivation resources. However, Ji Tianxing only wanted deity king level cultivation resources, materials, elixirs, and artifacts. The rest were thrown into the heaven-mending pearl for the 5 elements world to devour. After so many years, the divine power storm in the 5 elements world was still ongoing. There were still about 70% of the endless star crystal cores left. As for the space rings of more than 2,000 Sir Gods, Ji Tianxing only took a cursory look and did not check them one by one. Almost every interspatial ring had billions to tens of billions of cultivation resources stored in it. More than 2,000 space rings added up to more than 40 trillion worth of resources. It would be a pity to throw them away, but these resources were relatively low level. There were very few deity king level treasures. Ji Tianxing did not accept them. Instead, he threw the 2,000 space rings to Yun Yarrow, Ji Ku, Chao Qingyu, and the others. These are the spoils of war I picked up when I was cleaning up the battlefield. They are the space rings of those Sir Gods. Take your time to check them. Take whatever you want. Therefore, he threw this tedious task to everyone. Apart from cultivating, there was nothing else for them to do. Even something as boring as checking the space rings was new and interesting to them. Everyone gladly accepted the 2,000 space rings. After taking care of Nangong Ao, they began to search the rings. Although most of the space rings contained ordinary resources, their value was not too high. However, they would occasionally encounter some strange items and valuable treasures. This experience of digging for gold in the sand brought a lot of fun to everyone. While everyone was busy checking the space rings, Ji Tianxing meditated under the sacred tree. While he was recovering his strength, he was quietly planning his future plans. Everything had to be planned before acting. He had to see further ahead than the imperial tutor and plan earlier. Only then could he seize the initiative. For example, his ambush on the Meng Shuai could achieve such a perfect result because he had planned ahead and considered everything thoroughly. Unknowingly, 2 days had passed. The deity-slaying battleship was still in the center of the boundless heaven continent. It was still 2 days away from Yenshu Grotto Heaven. Today was the 14th of April. It was also the day that the Meng Shuai announced that he would kill Nangong Ao in public in the Empire of True Martial Arts. The people of the Empire of True Martial Arts had been waiting for this day with anticipation. Everyone thought that there would be a sea of people outside the gates of the capital. However, when tens of thousands of people ran to the gates at dawn, they found that the gates were tightly shut. The so-called killing of Nangong Ao in public would not happen at all. The confused and doubtful people asked around and realized that the atmosphere in the Empire of True Martial Arts was a little strange. Some of the well-informed experts had already found out the inside story. It was said that something had happened to the Meng Shuai and that he could not return to the domain of true martial on time. Nangong Ao could not be escorted back either. Chapter 4094. There was no such thing as an impenetrable wall. Even though Ji Tianxing hadn't leaked any information, even Nangong Buhua and the leaders of the 8 factions had been kept in the dark. However, the ambushers and generals of the realm of true martial quickly sensed that something was amiss. The imperial tutor personally oversaw the realm of true martial and commanded more than 3,000 divine lords and over 100 godly kings to set up an inescapable net. He'd set up dozens of large formations in an area of 100,000 miles, one after another. As long as the Meng Shuai brought more than 2,000 soldiers and escorted Nangong Ao back to the realm of true martial. More than 5,000 divine lords, over 100 godly kings, and 2 peak godly kings. It was easy to imagine that Kenshin wouldn't be able to return alive. However, one day before the Meng Shuai was to return to the realm of true martial, the imperial tutor suddenly couldn't contact him. One day later, not only did he lose contact with the Meng Shuai, but he also didn't return to the realm of true martial on time. He couldn't contact any of the 3 divine warships and 2,000 soldiers under his command. At that time, the imperial tutor realized that something was amiss. In order not to leak any information, he secretly sent a group of experts to the south to search. The result was indisputable. The group of experts split into 3 groups and searched the 3 routes that the Meng Shuai took back to the realm of true martial, but to no avail. From then on, the imperial tutor realized that something had happened to the Meng Shuai, and that the 2,000 soldiers were most likely dead. The 3,000 experts lying in ambush in the realm of true martial also had a bad feeling. Rumors began to spread in the army, and many people secretly discussed it. On the 14th of April, the imperial tutor was certain that the Meng Shuai had most likely been intercepted and killed on his way back. He no longer held out hope that the Meng Shuai could return safely. At the same time, the news spread throughout the realm of true martial, and tens of millions of people fought over it. As a result, the news of Meng Shuai being killed by a mysterious powerhouse spread like wildfire from the Zhenwu domain to the entire boundless heaven continent. In the past 2 months, the top forces of the entire boundless heaven continent had been paying attention to the battle between the Kenshin Rebel Alliance, the imperial tutor, and the Meng Shuai. It wasn't just the 18 ancient clans and 36 top forces. Even over 100 domain lords, close to 1,000 god king experts, and billions of civilians were paying attention and discussing this matter. After all, this unprecedented battle was related to the ownership of the boundless heaven continent and also determined the fate and future of hundreds of billions of people. The hundreds of billions of people living in the abyss of suffering naturally leaned towards the Kenshin, hoping that the Kenshin could overthrow the dark reign of the Shura God Emperor and end their suffering. However, these common people had no strength, influence, or status. They also had no right to speak. They could not support Kenshin with their actions, so they could only silently pray for Kenshin. Only the 100 domain lords, 36 top forces, and 18 ancient clans were qualified to participate in this unprecedented battle. Now, before the battle between the Rebel Alliance, the Imperial Tutor, and the Meng Shuai had officially begun, news of Meng Shuai's death had already spread. At first, everyone expressed disbelief when they heard this news. However, when everyone calmed down and thought about it carefully, who would dare to spread rumors and spread news of Meng Shuai's death at this critical juncture? That was a heinous crime that could kill even one's friends and family. Moreover, the news came from the Zhenwu domain, so it was highly credible. As a result, the entire boundless heaven continent was in an uproar. Many top forces, domain lords, and God King experts, as well as billions of civilians, discussed and vied with each other to spread this news. In just 2 short days, this news had spread to every corner of the boundless heaven continent. Almost everyone's first reaction was disbelief, followed by shock and surprise. As long as one was not a fool, one could guess that in the entire boundless heaven continent, who had the courage, speed, and strength to kill the Meng Shuai who was protected by more than 2,000 soldiers? It could only be Kenshin. In fact, no one else in the entire realm of the gods could do it. Only Kenshin could create such a miracle. Most people did not know the inside story, nor did they know that Kenshin had only left the Yenshu Grotto Heaven a few days ago. It was impossible for him to kill the Meng Shuai so quickly. 95% of the people only knew that the battle between Kenshin, the Imperial Tutor, and the Meng Shuai had already begun. Moreover, in the first round of battle, Kenshin had emerged victorious. He had killed the Meng Shuai and eliminated one of the 2 leaders of the boundless heaven continent as soon as he made his move. How shocking and morale-boosting was this? Billions of civilians saw the dawn of hope and were filled with confidence and anticipation for Kenshin. From their point of view, Kenshin had dealt a heavy blow to the Imperial Tutor and the Meng Shuai from the very beginning. Next, he would be able to easily sweep across the boundless heaven continent and destroy the Azura God Emperor's forces. When the territorial lords, ancient clans, and top forces heard the news, they were shocked and in disbelief. Their emotions became even more complicated. They knew the inside story and that Kenshin had only left the Yenshu Grotto Heaven a few days ago. At this moment, Kenshin should have just arrived at the domain of True Martial. However, Kenshin did not even go to the domain of True Martial. He had already killed the Meng Shuai a few days ago. This was too bizarre and too horrifying. Could it be that Kenshin had mastered some kind of spatial leap that allowed him to cross half a domain at once? Otherwise, how could he have arrived at the domain of True Martial in such a short time, set up an ambush halfway, and successfully killed the Meng Shuai and more than 2,000 soldiers? Everyone knew that the battle was chaotic. Even if Kenshin had killed the Meng Shuai, some of the 2,000 soldiers would have escaped. In fact, the Meng Shuai and the 2,400 soldiers had disappeared. They might have all been killed. This indicated that the sword god must have utilized a ceiling array formation to be able to capture Meng Shuai and the others in one fell swoop. If he had to set up a ceiling formation, it would have taken a lot of time. In that case, it was very likely that Kenshin had mastered the technique to cross half a domain in a single step. This made no sense at all. When the top forces and immortal kings analyzed this, they could not help but gasp. Their hearts were filled with fear and shock. Especially the 100 territorial lords and the forces under the Azura God Emperor. They were deeply uneasy and could not suppress the fear in their hearts. Even the Meng Shuai had been easily killed by Kenshin. If Kenshin's rebel alliance attacked them, who could survive? No one could. The forces that had been wavering on the fence felt the most conflicted. On one hand, they marveled at Kenshin's terrifying strength, and on the other, they regretted not making the decision to join the Kenshin rebel alliance sooner. Otherwise, they would be celebrating excitedly and waiting to share the fruits of their victory. Some of the clan leaders and sect masters gathered their elders and protectors to discuss whether they should join the rebel alliance as soon as possible. After all, this was their last chance. When the final battle between the rebel alliance and the Imperial Tutor began, it would be too late for them to join. Chapter 4095. To be able to become the top clans and forces in the boundless heaven continent, the leaders must have the corresponding shrewdness. There were many things and reasons that everyone was well aware of. If they did not seize the opportunity this time, they would not be able to join the rebel alliance. After all, the 9 forces led by Kenshin were enough to kill the imperial tutor and destroy the Shura God Emperor's forces. What was the use of these forces? If they were in Kenshin's shoes, they would not agree either. Therefore, the leaders and powerhouses of several forces had to make a decision within 2 days. Of course, there were still more than a dozen forces that continued to remain neutral and observe the situation. These people had different ideas. Although they also wanted to overthrow the Shura God Emperor's rule and restore the glory and power of the past. However, they would not participate in the war personally to avoid attracting disaster. They did not side with the Shura God Emperor because they did not want to be lackeys, grovel, and oppose the Kenshin. They did not side with the Kenshin and join the rebel alliance because they did not want to take the risk of starting a war with the Shura God Emperor. Even if they received news that the Kenshin had killed the Meng Shuai, they also knew that the Kenshin was very powerful. However, they knew that even if the Kenshin killed the Meng Shuai and the imperial tutor and took control of the boundless heaven continent, it would only be temporary. As long as the Shura God Emperor was not dead, he would definitely seek revenge on the Kenshin whenever he returned to the boundless heaven continent. When that time came, Kenshin would most likely be killed by the Shura God Emperor. The boundless heaven continent would still be in the hands of the Shura God Emperor. The outcome would not change. If the Kenshin was killed, the forces that joined the rebel alliance would not have a good ending. All in all, these forces that remained neutral and observed the situation wanted to protect themselves. No matter how the situation in the boundless heaven continent changed, they only wanted to protect the foundation that had been passed down for tens of thousands of years. By long drove the deity-slaying warship and sped high in the sky. In another day, the battleship would be able to return to Yenshu's cave. At this moment, a communication jade slip flew from the sky and entered the pilot's cabin. It floated beside the White Dragon, shining brightly. White Dragon knew at a glance that this was a message sent to his master by someone else. However, his master was cultivating in the distorted spacetime of the Divine Pagoda. The jade slip could not enter the Divine Pagoda, so his master could not receive it. Of course, the White Dragon would not receive the jade slip without permission, nor would it check the information inside. However, he thought that there might be something important waiting for his master to deal with. He couldn't delay it. Therefore, he used his consciousness to send a message to Ji Tianxing, who was in the distorted space and time. Ji Tianxing was not in seclusion. He was just cultivating. When he heard the White Dragon's call, he woke up. Only 3 days had passed in the outside world, but he had already been cultivating in the distorted spacetime for 5 months. Now that his strength and spirit had fully recovered, he had reached his peak state. Shua. With a flash of white light, Ji Tianxing appeared in the cockpit of the battleship. White Dragon hurriedly got up and bowed. Ji Tianxing nodded slightly, indicating that he should focus on driving the battleship. He picked up the jade slip and knew at a glance that it was from Nangong Buhua. His consciousness entered the jade slip, and Nangong Buhua's voice immediately sounded in his mind. Young Master Dragon, now the entire boundless heaven continent is spreading that you killed Meng Shuai and more than 2,000 soldiers under his command. None of them were left alive. The news spread, and the entire boundless heaven continent was talking about it. Everyone was shocked. The patriarchs and sect masters also knew about this. They couldn't believe it and came to ask me. They all guessed the truth of the matter and joined forces to ask me to send you a message to verify the truth. Just now, after the meeting in the Divine Light Palace, I sent them back for the time being. However, they will definitely come again tonight to ask for the result. You see, Nangong Buhua knew the truth. After Ji Tianxing finished the battle, he sent him a message to explain the situation and the result of the battle. However, Nangong Buhua had kept it a secret and did not reveal it to anyone. Even though he was pestered by the patriarchs and sect masters, he did not announce the result on his own. Instead, he asked Ji Tianxing first. Ji Tianxing was quite satisfied with this. He picked up the communication jade slip and sent a message to Nangong Buhua. Since the entire boundless heaven continent has spread the news, there's no need to hide it. It's about time. You can tell them the truth. Tell them that I'm on the way back to Yenshu Grotto Heaven. Ask their disciples to speed up. After replying to this message, Ji Tianxing returned to the distorted spacetime and continued to cultivate. On the other hand, Nangong Buhua was secretly relieved after receiving the message. After all, the reaction of the 7 patriarchs and Shu Balian was a little too strong. They joined forces to give him a lot of pressure. Fortunately, Ji Tianxing relented. Otherwise, there might be some awkwardness or unpleasantness. After all, the 8 experts felt that they were cheated and did not trust him. A day passed quickly. On the evening of the second day, the god-slaying battleship arrived at Yenshu Grotto Heaven. After entering Yenshu Grotto Heaven, the battleship flew across the sky at lightning speed and went straight to the main peak of the Light Palace. When the battleship arrived at the square outside the Light Palace, Nangong Buhua, the 7 patriarchs, Shu Balian, and the others had been waiting for a long time. Everyone had a smile on their faces. They were excited and warmly welcomed Ji Tianxing back. Ji Tianxing kept the battleship and landed on the square alone. He responded to everyone's greetings and salutes. After the greetings were over, Ji Tianxing did not go to rest. He walked into the Light Palace, surrounded by the crowd. The leaders of the 9 forces gathered in the Light Palace. Ji Tianxing took the opportunity to discuss matters. He first announced the results of the operation and then talked about the next step of the plan. Although I've successfully intercepted and killed Meng Shuai, destroyed more than 2,000 soldiers under his command, and rescued Nangong Ao, the traps and ambushes of the Zhen Wu domain have been destroyed. However, this is only the beginning of the war. The enemy has lost their leader, Meng Shuai, the imperial tutor, patrol commander Qi Yang, and many other Divine King experts. Especially Qi Yang. He and Meng Shuai split up and captured the 8th elder in the northwest. They then beheaded the 8th elder in public. Not only do we have to save Nangong Ao, but we also have to avenge the 8th elder. Moreover, Qi Yang is also at the top of the death list. He is one of the targets that must be eliminated. Therefore, I will depart today to kill Qi Yang. No one expected Ji Tianxing to announce the next step of the plan without discussing it with the others. However, if he could kill Meng Shuai, it would be easy for him to kill Qi Yang. However, they still had to express their opinions and show their concern. Alliance Master, you have just returned from a mission. You should rest for 2 days before killing Qi Yang. That's right. You are our leader. You shouldn't put yourself in danger so many times. Everyone is worried about your safety. Alliance Master, I am willing to lead the 4 elders of my clan to follow you into battle. I am also willing to follow you to kill Qi Yang. Chapter 4096. Everyone present was a sly old fox. Of course, they knew how to seize the opportunity to take the credit. Qi Yang was not strong. He was only in the 9th level of the Divine King realm. Many of the experts present were confident that they could kill him. However, Qi Yang was of noble status. He was the commander of the patrol. Killing him would be a great achievement. In Ji Tianxing's death list, Qi Yang was one of the top 5 important figures. The first was the imperial tutor, and the second was the Meng Shuai. If they followed Ji Tianxing to kill Qi Yang, they could help Ji Tianxing and protect his reputation. At the same time, they could get credit for killing Qi Yang. Most importantly, Ji Tianxing had easily killed Qi Yang. Perhaps they didn't even need to do anything to get the credit. Who would not want to take advantage of such an opportunity? Therefore, the patriarchs of the 7 clans and Shu Bai Lian eagerly signed up to go with Ji Tianxing. Unfortunately, Ji Tianxing rejected all of them. I have Qi Yang's whereabouts. You don't have to follow me. I can handle it. Don't forget that the mission I gave you is more important. So many days have passed, and there are only a few days left before the deadline. When will your disciples arrive? Hearing Ji Tianxing's question, the clan leaders and clan leaders were stunned for a moment. Then, they explained with a smile. Don't worry, Alliance Master. Our disciples are rushing at full speed. They will definitely arrive at Yenshu's heavenly abode before the deadline. How could we disobey the Alliance leader's orders? Don't worry, Alliance Master. Our clan will also arrive on time. Our disciples are rushing at full speed. They will arrive in 3 days at the latest. The clan leaders all said that their disciples would arrive on time. Ji Tianxing did not urge them anymore. He said in a dignified tone, "It will take me at least 8 days to kill Qi Yang. The deadline will be up in 5 days, and all the members of the Rebel Alliance will be here. When the time comes, you will have to follow the original plan and fight separately. Eliminate the targets and forces on the death list. The performance and contribution of each force will determine the rewards after the war. I hope that everyone can fight for the common goal, and not for selfish reasons. If you think you can hide it from me, then go ahead and try. Don't say that I didn't warn you." His tone was very cold, and the threat in it was self-evident. The faces of all the patriarchs and sect masters stiffened, and a trace of nervousness and shame flashed through their eyes. Although they maintained a smile on the surface and repeatedly said that they did not dare. But in reality, everyone was vigilant in their hearts and hurriedly put away those selfish thoughts. In front of Kenshin, they did not dare to play tricks. Especially since Kenshin had already warned them in public. If they dared to do it again, they would really be cutting themselves off from the Rebel Alliance. At that time, the Kenshin would not welcome them and might even expel them from the Rebel Alliance. They had the mark of the Rebel Alliance and were mortal enemies with the Imperial Tutor. If they offended both sides, they would have nowhere to go and their fates would be miserable. Such a consequence caused every force to be alarmed. Soon, the meeting was over. All the patriarchs, sect masters, and god kings left the meeting hall. Ji Tianxing stayed in the hall and reminded Nangong Buhua and Nangong Nahuang of many things. When they walked out of the hall, the patriarchs and sect masters were not in a hurry to leave. They went to a secluded area and pretended to take a stroll in the garden, but in reality, they were communicating and discussing what had just happened. Before this, everyone thought that Kenshin did not trust us enough and even hid it from us. Everyone was a little angry and wanted to wait for Kenshin to come back so that we could have a heart-to-heart talk with him. But now, everyone can see that Kenshin did not hide this and even reminded everyone in public. Yes. At this point, I am not afraid of everyone blaming me. Actually, how shrewd is Kenshin? How can he not see that everyone has their own selfish motives? In the past, he did not point it out, but this time, since everyone wanted to make things difficult for him, he might as well point it out. So, everyone should settle down and do what they want to do. In that case, Kenshin left everyone some face. Previously, we all had our own selfish motives, so he was unwilling to trust us. If after today, everyone is still like before, I'm afraid Kenshin will be very disappointed. So, everyone, take care of yourselves. Don't have any more unrealistic fantasies. We have already joined the Rebel Alliance. This is something that the entire boundless heaven continent knows. Only by doing things wholeheartedly can we obtain Kenshin's recognition, trust, and reward. Don't forget, when the alliance was established, they talked about basic benefits. Just now, Kenshin also said that after we succeed in quelling the rebels, he will still reward us according to our contributions. That's right. No matter what everyone thinks, our war god clan will not be a burden anymore. From now on, we will earnestly carry out all of Kenshin's orders. Ha ha. Our Jiang clan has never complained about Kenshin and has always followed orders. The Lan clan is also following orders and is most loyal to Kenshin. Everyone, please don't count our Lan clan in. Previously, it was you guys who were making a ruckus and wanted to ask for an explanation from Kenshin. Our Phoenix clan did not participate. The 7 clan leaders and Shu Balian were all shrewd people. They immediately analyzed the situation and knew what to do from now on. Thus, everyone became righteous and loyal to the sword god, as if they were not going to wallow in the mire with the rest of the sword gods. Thus, the 8 factions all had the intention to compete with each other. They all wanted to compete in future missions to see who could make a great contribution and obtain Kenshin's favor. In the Great Light Hall, the door was tightly shut, and only Ji Tianxing, Nangong Buhua, and Nangong Nahuang were in the hall. Nangong Buhua frowned and said worriedly, "Young Master Long, before you came back, the 8 clan leaders and sect leader were still making a ruckus and wanted to ask for an explanation from you. After all, you lied to them before and made them feel that they were not trusted. Just now, you exposed their selfishness in front of everyone and even threatened them. I'm worried. Before he could finish, Ji Tianxing interrupted him and chuckled. What are you worried about? Are you afraid that they will be disloyal, selfish, and not loyal to the rebel alliance? Sigh. Nangong Buhua did not say anything and only sighed in agreement. Nangong Nihuang was also a little worried. They don't want to take the risk and lose their own forces, but they want to gain credit. It's really hard to explain. Young master, our alliance has just been established, and the trust between us still needs to be built up bit by bit. Don't be too hasty. This father and daughter pair had nothing to say about Ji Tianxing, but they were also worried sick about the rebel alliance. Ji Tianxing waved his hand and comforted them. Don't worry, those 8 guys are not fools and naturally know what to do. They have already joined the rebel alliance and have no way out. The only way out is to follow my orders and do things honestly and do as much as possible. So, your worries are unnecessary. Moreover, I reminded them today because I don't want to punish them after the matter really happens. Chapter 4097. As the saying goes, the ugly things should be said first. Since the rebel alliance had just been formed, Ji Tianxing had to bring up the problem before anything awkward or unpleasant happened. This way, they could avoid dealing with those factions after the matter really happened, which would make it very difficult for everyone. Most importantly, Ji Tianxing's forces, methods, and schemes were all here. Even the imperial tutor and the Meng Shuai had suffered greatly in his hands, let alone the other 8 forces. Therefore, no one dared to fall out with him and could only obediently follow his orders. After listening to Ji Tianxing's explanation, Nangong Buhua and his daughter heaved a sigh of relief. Since Ji Tianxing was confident that he could defeat those 8 forces, they had nothing to worry about. Then, Nangong Buhua continued to report, Young Master Long, just before you came back, I received 4 messages. Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows, and the corners of his mouth curled into a playful smile as he asked, It's those forces that waver and watch in the dark, right? Nangong Buhua quickly nodded and said, Yes. Yesterday, the news of the Meng Shuai's assassination spread. Today, they eagerly sent a message to express their willingness to join the rebel alliance. Nangong Nihuang curled her lips in disdain and said, These guys are too arrogant. They think they are very smart, but they are actually a bunch of clowns. Now that they saw you easily kill the Meng Shuai and more than 2,000 experts, they finally made up their minds. Since Nangong Buhua had already said what he wanted to say, he did not make any more comments and asked directly, Young Master Long, how do you think we should deal with this matter? Do you agree or disagree? Ji Tianxing smiled and said, When the rebel alliance was just formed, I already said it. As long as those clans and top forces are willing to help us overthrow the Shura God Emperor, I will not reject them. Of course, I have to agree. However, I am not in a hurry to give them an answer. In the next 2 days, there should be a few more forces that have made up their minds and sent messages to request to join us. When the time comes, we will deal with them together. Nangong Buhua immediately revealed a fox-like smile, as if he understood. He nodded and said, Okay, let's do as you say. Let's leave them alone first. After hesitating for a moment, he asked again, Young Master Long, may I ask what kind of treatment do you plan to give those forces if they join the rebel alliance? Before Ji Tianxing could answer, Nangong Nihuang frowned and said, They joined later and obviously do not have the determination and sincerity. Ji Tianxing smiled and said, Of course they don't have the qualifications to talk about conditions, but if you want them to work hard, you still have to promise them certain benefits. How about this? I'll grant them a region of land, limited to their respective regions. If they think the conditions are too. Nangong Buhua said with a playful smile, Of course. If they want to haggle, then tell them to scram. Being able to get them to join the alliance and obtain a region of land was already good enough. At the very least, they would be able to preserve their foundation after the matter was settled. Those forces that go against us can't even protect their 10,000 years of foundation. Comparing the two, they will be satisfied. Ji Tianxing nodded and said, Very good, I will leave this matter to you. Also, I have divided the death list into 2 and will give it to you now. You will lead those forces to deal with the experts and forces on the first list. I will command those 3 forces to deal with the second list. Nangong Buhua nodded and asked, Nangong Ao and the 8th Elder have not collected enough information, and the death list is only 80% complete. What about the remaining 20%? Do we still need to send people to investigate? No need. Ji Tianxing waved his hand and said, when we fight with the Imperial Tutor, many forces hiding in the dark will jump out. Even if there are some forces hiding very deeply, don't bother about them for now. After we take control of the boundless heaven continent, you can slowly investigate and eliminate them. You must know that even if we take control of the boundless heaven continent, you will still have many things to do. When Nangong Buhua heard this, not only did he not feel tired, but he also felt flattered and pleasantly surprised. Of course, he understood the meaning behind Ji Tianxing's words. He was clearly saying that after Ji Tianxing took control of the boundless heaven continent, he would go to other continents. And as Ji Tianxing's spokesperson, he would take control of the boundless heaven continent. What kind of glory and power was this? It also showed how much Ji Tianxing trusted and valued him. How could Nangong Buhua not be excited? Nangong Nihuang was also very smart. She understood Ji Tianxing's deep meaning, and her beautiful eyes couldn't help but light up. She looked at Ji Tianxing with eyes full of gratitude. Ji Tianxing did not say anything else. He opened the spatial door of the divine pagoda and pulled Nangong Ao out of the distorted space-time. A few days had passed in the outside world, and he had been recuperating in the distorted space-time for half a year. Although his injuries were still serious, at least he was awake and could recuperate by himself. I will leave Nangong Ao to you. Let him stay in Yenshu Grotto Heaven to recuperate. After this battle, I will reward him according to his merits. Ji Tianxing handed Nangong Ao to Nangong Buhua and was about to leave the Great Hall of Light. He had told them everything that needed to be told, and now he was going to the northwest to kill the patrol commander, Qi Yang. Nangong Buhua and Nangong Nihuang chased after him, wanting to send him out of Yenshu Grotto Heaven. But Ji Tianxing refused. There is no need to send me out. It is not a good thing to attract attention. Take care of Nangong Ao first, and remember to control the situation. After he finished speaking, he waved at Nangong Buhua and his daughter and flew up into the sky. Nangong Buhua and Nangong Nihuang stood outside the palace gate, looking up at his figure. Nangong Ao, who was very weak, also wanted to walk over and send Ji Tianxing off with his eyes. But his injuries were too serious, and he fell down before he could take 2 steps. Nangong Buhua hurriedly helped him up, asked about his injuries, and sent someone to send him back to his residence. Next, Nangong Buhua and Nangong Nihuang went to do their own tasks. Although they were worried about Ji Tianxing's safety, but they were not vague about what they should do. They also understood that only by controlling the situation and guarding Yenshu Grotto Heaven could they avoid Ji Tianxing's worries. Not long after, the leaders of the 8 forces also heard the news of Ji Tianxing's departure. Although they were mentally prepared, Ji Tianxing's eagerness to leave still surprised them. At the same time, they were also a little disappointed. After Ji Tianxing left Yenshu Grotto Heaven, he only told Nangong Buhua and his daughter some things, and did not even greet them. It was clear who was more important and who was more trusted by Ji Tianxing. But they were not jealous, and they knew that it was useless. They secretly made up their minds to make contributions, and let Ji Tianxing see them in a new light. Chapter 4098. Whoosh! The Godslayer battleship streaked through the sky like an invisible black line, heading toward the northwest. Inside the battleship, White Dragon was piloting the ship. Ji Tianxing had already entered the distorted spacetime of the Jiutian 10 Absolutes Pagoda to cultivate. Sai, Master was born to be busy. He's been constantly on the move all his life, without a moment's rest. Seeing his master so busy, White Dragon sighed emotionally. But he also knew that from the moment his master began his revenge mission, he was destined to be on the move and kill. Only when the 5 god emperors were killed would his work end and he would be able to enjoy a long period of peace. He didn't feel tired, but he didn't want to see his master so tired. But he was too weak. Even though he had become a god king, he couldn't help his master much. Now that his master had given him the most important task of piloting the battleship, he could only do his best to fulfill his master's trust. Ji Tianxing was already a peak god king. But he discovered that his strength and cultivation base hadn't reached the limit. There was still room for improvement. As a peak god king, he was at least 10 times stronger than an ordinary peak god king. If he reached the limit, he would be many times stronger than a peak god king. Based on his past experience, he guessed that it would be 99 times. 99 times stronger than a peak god king? Is that still a god king? I'm probably a god emperor now, right? With this thought, Ji Tianxing decided to continue cultivating and increasing his strength so that he could reach the limit as soon as possible. In the battle to kill the Meng Shuai, he had obtained more than 50 quintessence fragments, but he hadn't had the time to refine them. Now that he was on the move, he could refine them and absorb more divine Tao laws while increasing his strength. Before he set off, he had already obtained the relevant information. 10 days ago, Qi Yang had led 2,000 soldiers to the rising waters in the northwest, capturing and killing the 8th elder of the Nangong clan. After that incident, Qi Yang and the 2,000 soldiers under his command temporarily stayed in the Water of Breath to rest and reorganize. Moreover, the imperial tutor and the Meng Shuai had given him instructions to carry out his mission there. However, Ji Tianxing's destination this time was not the rising water realm. He still had to continue heading north. This was because he had let Nangong Buhua personally take charge of the Nangong clan's intelligence network. At the same time, the rebel alliance's Shimi Grotto Heaven had one of the best intelligence networks in the boundless heaven continent. Through Shimi Paradise's investigation, he learned that Qi Yang had left the Water of Breath with his subordinates 2 days ago. 2 days ago, the news of Meng Shuai's assassination had just spread. Even though the Shimi Grotto Heaven's intelligence network couldn't find out why Qi Yang had left, or where he had gone. However, after Ji Tianxing received the news, he could roughly guess Qi Yang's movements after careful analysis. Firstly, the imperial tutor and the Meng Shuai had set up a trap in the Zhenwu domain to ambush Ji Tianxing. However, Meng Shuai was killed and Nangong Ao was rescued. Their plan was ruined. The imperial tutor would not continue to stay in the Zhenwu domain. He would definitely leave with his 3,000 soldiers. Therefore, Qi Yang would definitely not go to the Zhenwu domain. Secondly, the Shura God Emperor's base was in the Dark Night domain in the north. That was the Shura God Emperor's base camp. Usually, the imperial tutor, the Meng Shuai, and Qi Yang would guard that place. Now that the Meng Shuai had been killed, the morale of the imperial tutor's troops was unstable. Out of consideration for stability, the imperial tutor would most likely lead his soldiers back to the Dark Night domain to make further plans. Therefore, Ji Tianxing speculated that Qi Yang and his 2,000 soldiers must be on their way to the Dark Night domain. From the Water of Breath to the Dark Night domain, they would have to cross 8 domains. If Qi Yang were to travel alone, he might be able to arrive in 8 days. However, he would be traveling with 2,000 soldiers on a divine warship, so he wouldn't be traveling too fast. Even if he flew at full speed, it would still take 10 to 11 days. In Ji Tianxing's mind, he had already deduced the route from the Water of Breath to the Dark Night domain. He knew exactly which domains were on this route and which important locations it would pass through. Now that 2 days had passed, he could roughly estimate Qi Yang's location. However, it would take at least a day for the White Dragon to reach that location on the divine warship. By then, Qi Yang would be far away. Therefore, Ji Tianxing had to calculate the divine warship's route and where he would be able to intercept Qi Yang through complicated and meticulous calculations. To many godly kings, it was very difficult for them to guarantee the accuracy of this question given their knowledge. However, Ji Tianxing only needed 10 breaths of time to calculate the correct result. 2 days later, in the windswept empire's territory, the divine warship's route would cross with Qi Yang's. He could intercept and kill Qi Yang there. Of course, the premise was that Qi Yang was rushing back to the Dark Night domain as fast as he could. 2 days in the outside world was equivalent to 100 days in the distorted spacetime. Ji Tianxing had collected more than 50 quintessence fragments. Only 17 of them belonged to god kings, while the rest belonged to intermediate god kings. Refining these quintessence fragments should have been faster. However, the first to be refined was, of course, the Meng Shuai's quintessence fragment. After all, many of the imperial tutors and Meng Shuai's plans, actions, and secrets were hidden in the memories of the Meng Shuai's soul. Ji Tianxing spent a month carefully refining the Meng Shuai's memories. As expected, he had obtained countless secrets. Through the memories of the Meng Shuai's soul, he learned many of the Azura God Emperor's secrets. For example, in which year did God Emperor Xiao Luo lead his elite troops, and which high-level divine kings left the divine world for the extraterrestrial starry skies? He also knew how many cultivation resources the boundless heaven continent collected every year and transported them to outer space once every 50 years. He also knew the rough route of the people responsible for transporting the resources. Another example was that of the current 18 ancient clans and 36 top forces. 6 of them pretended to be neutral on the surface, but they were secretly the Azura God Emperor's lackeys. There were also 3 superpowers that had been living in seclusion for more than 2,000 years. In fact, they had long since submitted to the Azura God Emperor. There were also many bits and pieces of information and secrets that ran through the timeline of more than 800 years. They clearly showed the Meng Shuai's experiences over the years. After refining the Meng Shuai's quintessence fragment, Ji Tianxing gained a deeper and more thorough understanding of the boundless heaven continent. The number of experts the Azura God Emperor had left on the boundless heaven continent, the distribution of their forces, and the battle plans of the imperial tutor and the Meng Shuai were all in Ji Tianxing's hands. To him, this was an immeasurably valuable gain. It was as valuable as a supreme-grade king-level divine artifact. At the very least, it would allow his rebel alliance to avoid detours and reduce casualties in their future operations against the imperial tutor. They could even gain insight into opportunities. Among the many secrets the Meng Shuai knew, there was one that was particularly important. That was, the Azura God Emperor knew that Kenshin had returned to the God realm and wanted to destroy his forces on the boundless heaven continent. However, the Azura God Emperor did not intend to pay attention to it. That was because the research in outer space had finally reached a critical juncture. Chapter 4099. Ji Tianxing had thought that he'd be able to learn more about the grey mist from the Meng Shuai's memories. He hadn't expected that even the Meng Shuai wouldn't know much about the Azura God Emperor's plans. After all, the Meng Shuai and the imperial tutor had been ordered to guard the boundless heaven continent and hadn't left the God realm for nearly 1,000 years. Somewhat disappointed, Ji Tianxing thought to himself, it seems that I'll have to go to the stars if I want to investigate the grey mist. The Azura God Emperor is extremely secretive about this matter. Even confidants like the imperial tutor and the Meng Shuai haven't divulged any useful information or secrets. After refining the Meng Shuai's quintessence fragment, Ji Tianxing moved on to the other God King's quintessence fragments. Before he knew it, 100 days had passed. In total, he'd refined 10 quintessence fragments and gained 100 new laws of the divine Tao. The Meng Shuai was the main reason he'd gained so many laws of the divine Tao. After all, the Meng Shuai was a bona fide peak God King who'd mastered nearly 900 laws of the divine Tao. After this round of cultivation, Ji Tianxing's mastery of the divine Tao had reached 1,300 laws of the divine Tao. He still didn't know how many laws of the divine Tao a God Emperor could master. However, he knew that within the God King realm, he was already unprecedented and would not be surpassed in the future. That evening, the White Dragon steered the Godslayer warship toward the predetermined location. Ji Tianxing had no choice but to call it a day after cultivating for 100 days in the distorted spacetime. He'd have to wait until he killed Qi Yang to refine the remaining 40 or so quintessence fragments. The setting sun was as red as blood. Outside Heaven's Bridge Pass, cold winds rustled. A dark green forest stretched in the distance, while withered yellow weeds swayed in the wind nearby. The Godslayer warship flew straight toward Heaven's Bridge Pass. According to Ji Tianxing's calculations, Qi Yang and his subordinates would pass by when he arrived at Heaven's Bridge Pass. After all, this was where Qi Yang had to pass on his way back to the Dark Night domain. Heaven's Bridge Pass was a cliff between 2 mountain peaks that was more than 2,000 feet deep. Below the cliff was a 1,000-foot wide river with endless water. The cliffs on both sides were straight and precipitous. The mountain peaks were more than 2,000 feet in height. Looking down at this cliff from high up in the sky, it looked as if it had been hacked by the heavens with a giant axe. That was why it had the name Heaven Chiming Pass. Below the cliff was filled with water vapor and clouds. The bridge pass was Heaven's bridge pass was always shrouded in a hazy mist. After the god-slaying battleship arrived at the Heaven Harmony Pass, it stopped at a height of 40,000 feet and hid within the clouds. Ji Tianxing and White Dragon stood in the cockpit, looking around vigilantly. At the same time, to find traces to find cheese. Searched, after searching S to search a S to find Estus, a S after a while, Bai Long couldn't wait any longer. He asked, Master, according to your calculations, Qi Yang will definitely pass by here if he wants to return to the Dark Night domain. Even if your calculations are off, it shouldn't be more than 15 minutes, right? With the King level's flying speed, 15 minutes would cover a distance of a few 100,000 miles. Ji Tianxing nodded and said, Don't be anxious. Wait patiently. Bai Long nodded and said, Master, since there's a 15 minutes difference, wouldn't we be waiting for nothing if Qi Yang has already passed by? Ji Tianxing waved his hand and explained, It's impossible for such a situation to occur. I calculated based on his fastest speed, so he will only be later and not earlier. Bai Long thought it made sense. His master calculated based on Qi Yang's fastest speed. That was the ideal situation. But in reality, Qi Yang might not be able to maintain his fastest speed with 2,000 soldiers. Therefore, as long as Qi Yang and his men passed by Heaven's Bridge Pass, they wouldn't miss it. Master and Bai Long stood in the cockpit and waited patiently. Time passed quietly. The setting sun slowly set in the sky and the sky gradually darkened. 15 minutes passed quickly. There was still no movement south of Heaven's Bridge Pass. Bai Long was a little anxious. He secretly frowned and thought, even if there is a mistake in Master's estimation, 15 minutes have already passed. He was worried that they would miss, but he couldn't remind Ji Tianxing. Moreover, as his disciple, he should have more confidence in his master. Just like that, the god-slaying battleship concealed its tracks and aura. The master and disciple continued to wait. The master and disciple's expressions and reactions were different. Ji Tianxing's expression was calm and his eyes were clear. He looked calm and composed, as if he had a card up his sleeve. Bai Long, on the other hand, frowned and looked around. He was clearly worried and anxious. However, seeing his master's confidence and calmness, he calmed down a lot. Soon, another 15 minutes had passed. The setting sun had already set. The sky was getting darker and darker. Night gradually fell. Several times, White Dragon couldn't help but ask Ji Tianxing if they should search the south. Maybe Qi Yang and his men were on their way here. They could find them if they searched south. But that would make him look too impatient. Therefore, he could only put away his worries and anxiety and wait with his master. Finally, night fell. Heaven and earth returned to darkness. An hour had passed since Ji Tianxing's prediction, but Qi Yang still hadn't appeared. With the speed of the god-slaying battleship, Qi Yang and his men had already flown 5 million miles in an hour. No matter how one looked at it, the facts proved that Ji Tianxing's prediction was wrong. Bai Long was a little regretful. After hesitating for a while, he said, Master, maybe Qi Yang is too cunning. He didn't pass by here. Why don't we rush to the Dark Night domain to kill him? Everyone knew that Qi Yang was going to return to his lair. It would be a sure thing to kill him in the Dark Night domain. However, doing so would waste more time, and there would be more dangers and uncertainties. Ji Tianxing raised his hand to stop Bai Long. He said calmly, Don't worry. Wait a little longer. He should be here soon. In fact, Bai Long was certain that Qi Yang wouldn't be here. Seeing his master so persistent, he couldn't say anything. He could only wait patiently. Who knew that a miracle would happen after 100 breath? South of Heaven Pass, in the night sky tens of thousands of miles away, 2 spots of light appeared. The 2 spots of light, one in front and one behind, streaked across the night sky like shooting stars. They flew toward Heaven Pass as fast as lightning. Bai Long's divine sense could only scan a radius of 10,000 miles. He could only see the light, but he couldn't see what was in the light. However, Ji Tianxing's divine sense had already seen it clearly. The two spots of light were two god-slaying battleships that were thousands of feet long, although the god-slaying battleships didn't have anything special about them, and there were no emblems on their bodies. However, for two god-slaying battleships to pass by Heaven Pass at this time, there was no one else other than Qi Yang and his men. Chapter 4100. At first, White Dragon had been filled with disappointment and was about to give up. But he hadn't expected two warships to appear at this time. When he saw the two lights, his first reaction was that his master's prediction was correct. Qi Yang had indeed come. Even though he was an hour later than predicted, Qi Yang had still passed through Heaven's Chimney Pass. White Dragon finally understood why his master had been so calm until now. He'd been certain that Qi Yang would pass through here. A thought flashed through his mind. Could it be that after killing the Meng Shuai, Master refined the memories of the Meng Shuai's soul and learned of the Meng Shuai's battle plan? The Meng Shuai had already ordered Qi Yang to return to the Anya domain. That should be the case. Otherwise, Master wouldn't be so confident. Thinking of this, White Dragon asked, "Master, did you refine the memories of the Meng Shuai's soul and learn of their plan? Was that why you were so certain that Qi Yang would pass through here?" Ji Tianxing calmly gazed ahead and slowly raised his hands. As the two lights drew closer and closer, he quickly gathered his divine power and prepared to use his ultimate skill to intercept the two warships. His answer to White Dragon's question was simple. No. Since he hadn't foreseen this, there was only one answer. He had indeed predicted that Qi Yang would pass through Heaven's Chimney Pass. White Dragon understood this as well. It was a matter of probability. After news of the Meng Shuai's death spread, Qi Yang had only two choices. The first was to return to the Anya domain as quickly as possible and meet up with the imperial tutor. The second was to head elsewhere as quickly as possible to carry out new orders or missions. In short, Qi Yang couldn't stay in the waters of respiration and wait for Ji Tianxing to kill him. There was only a 50% chance that Qi Yang would pass through Heaven's Chimney Pass. However, Ji Tianxing had analyzed the situation and Qi Yang's and the imperial tutor's styles of conduct. He was certain that Qi Yang would choose the safer option, which was to return to the Anya domain. While these thoughts flashed through White Dragon's mind, the two lights had already arrived. It seemed that in another 2 to 3 breaths of time, the two battleships would cross the Sky Chimera Pass and fly towards the north. At this moment, Ji Tianxing finally made his move. Divine Clock, go! With a low shout, he suddenly exerted his strength and summoned the primordial chaos bell. A fist-sized divine clock flew out of the battleship and appeared high up in the sky, instantly expanding billions of times. Buzz! Following a muffled explosion, the primordial bell of primordial chaos expanded to a radius of 10,000 miles. It descended from the sky and covered the surroundings of Heaven Chiming Pass. The primordial chaos bell also enveloped the god-slaying battleship and the two black battleships. Under the control of Ji Tianxing, the divine bell once again released a majestic divine power, forming a light wall in the depths of the ground, completely sealing off the space within a radius of 10,000 miles. As a result, the two battleships were unable to escape even if they had wings. The world was already pitch black, so the primordial chaos bell that spanned thousands of miles didn't seem to have any effect on them. The 2,000 experts in the two warships did not notice anything amiss. Only the few god generals piloting the battleships realized that the divine clock had descended from the sky and covered all the light. The few god generals panicked and hurriedly controlled the arrays of the battleships to stop the battleships. In this way, the tragedy of the battleships crashing into the divine clock was avoided. The two battleships stopped in the night sky. The few god generals sounded the alarm and immediately woke up the experts in the battleships. There were more than 1,000 soldiers in each battleship. They were all in their rooms circulating their energy or resting with their eyes closed. Suddenly, they heard the urgent alarm. Everyone rushed out of their rooms and gathered in the battleships. These soldiers were all well trained and reacted quickly. In just 10 breaths, all 2,000 of them had gathered. Swoosh! Not only that, The few god generals piloting the battleships also opened the defensive arrays of the battleships. More than 200 cannons popped out and looked around cautiously. Once enemies appeared, they would open fire without hesitation. In fact, Ji Tianxing's speculation was right. The 2,000 well-trained soldiers in the two battleships were Qi Yang's subordinate. At this moment, Qi Yang was sitting in the main hall of the first battleship. He looked dignified as he issued a series of orders. He also spread out his divine consciousness to check the situation outside. Originally, he was a 9th-level divine king realm expert. His divine consciousness could cover a radius of 90,000 miles. However, his divine consciousness was blocked by the primordial chaos bell when it reached 10,000 miles. He could not extend it no matter how hard he tried. Qi Yang immediately realized that the divine artifact that sealed them was of a very high grade and powerful divine artifact. Then, his divine sense probed into the ground and came into contact with the underground light wall. The light wall was very powerful. Not only could it block his divine consciousness, but it also gave him great pressure. Qi Yang had a few upper king-grade divine artifacts. He was well aware of the power of upper king-grade divine artifacts. Therefore, he immediately determined that the divine clock that sealed them was most likely a superior king-grade divine artifact. Based on Qi Yang's experience, even a peak divine king might not have a superior king-grade divine artifact. Originally, when he knew that the Meng Shuai was intercepted by Kenshin, he was deeply afraid and fearful. On the way back to the Anya region, he was constantly on tenterhooks, guarding against Kenshin coming to kill him. The heavenly generals under his command kept persuading him that Kenshin had returned to Yenshu's grotto heaven and would not come to kill him. No matter how much the people analyzed and spoke with certainty, he did not let down his guard and worry. Even though he did not want to lose his dignity in front of his subordinates and appear to be timid and weak. However, he knew that Kenshin could not be judged by common sense. He was best at creating miracles and creating the unthinkable. Just like how Kenshin intercepted and killed the Meng Shuai. That was also impossible in the eyes of ordinary people. However, Kenshin still managed to do it. Just like now, the soldiers thought that Kenshin would not come to kill him. However, who could be sure? Who could guarantee? At least, Qi Yang thought that there was a 50% chance that Kenshin would come to kill him. Reality proved that Qi Yang was right. However, he was not happy at all. Instead, his mood became heavier and his expression turned uglier. Kenshin. It must be you. Qi Yang looked sharply at the night sky outside the warship and roared silently in his heart. Only you have the guts and strength to ambush me at Tianqiang Pass. Only you can take out a superior king-grade divine artifact so casually. It seemed to be to verify his guess. Not far away, Ji Tianxing put away the deity-slaying warship that had been in an invisible state and had concealed its aura. Swoosh! He appeared alone in the night sky and stood proudly. His expression was indifferent. With his hands behind his back, he quietly looked at the two divine warships. His cold and sharp gaze seemed to be able to see through the cover of the warship and was directed at Qi Yang in the crowd. Even though he did not speak, there was an invisible murderous aura and power that spread between heaven and earth.